Hey guys, Kinggath here with another episode of the Kinggath podcast. Today's guest is a lead on a project that has gotten a lot of new attention thanks to a little bit of an early build release. Welcome, Loaf. He is the lead level designer for Fallout Miami. I guess lead exterior designer, you said, right?
Yeah, lead exterior. We currently have two lead level designers. There's Rainbow Survivor and myself. I handle a lot of the exterior world space type stuff and hopefully incorporate some of my architectural expertise with that, especially on the development process. But as for right now, I'm just lead exterior level designer.
I mean, that's a lot because you guys are doing a whole big old world space.
Yeah. It's definitely a lot to chew, but it's been a really fun experience, and we have a lot of great minds, in the pit working together. So I'm eager to see what we can turn out over the next couple of years, and we've already done a lot of really impressive work as is.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy that we sign on to these hobbies, and then the next thing you know, we're locked in for multi-year non-contracts because it takes that
Oh
long.
yeah, yep.
Yeah, it's pretty.
Well, that's the fun of modding in a nutshell. I mean, first you delve into it, it's just, how can I help, and then it becomes something so much more. I mean, being a part of this community has been an outstanding roller coaster, but at the same time, experience for me.
Sure, absolutely. Like there's it's if you want to get into the game industry, I can't imagine a better training school than
I
starting
agree.
with modding.
I agree entirely.
So, especially on a project like what Mike Miami is doing, because you guys are effectively designing. I know I talked to Constantine, and he described it as somewhere in between a DLC and a new game, in the sense that you're keeping true to Fallout, but there's enough new mechanics, and the world space is large enough that it could kind of feel like its own game. So, in that case, you guys have to think about everything. You've got to think about balance and optimization, and good flow. Like there's just so many things you have to put your minds to that end up covering all the bases of a full video game.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's been half of the fun experience is identifying all those different parts in the Bethesda toolkit and how we can kind of introduce those to, the Fallout fans. How we can, uncover parts of the storyline and things you've seen in other DLCs in the base game itself and kind of reinventing those in our own personal way, with its own Miami twist, but at the same time preserving that Bethesda integrity. And that you kind of saw that with the trailer that we released. I think it was, almost a year ago now?
Yeah, that trailer was magnificent. I think it tricked half the community of Fallout fans into thinking it was the next New Vegas.
Well, it definitely tricked me for the most part. That's actually what brought me onto the project and my interest in modding just in general. When I first saw that trailer, I was over in Australia. My buddy goes, you gotta check out this really cool trailer. I was like, oh, is this a new DLC they're releasing? Before I knew it, I found it was a mod, and I was like, okay, how can I help?
Yeah.
How can I help?
That's awesome. I mean, that's probably exactly why they released that trailer initially, was to try and draw in some more talent. Because it can be a tough thing, because I think there's this notion among people who play with mods that you have to be some sort of modding expert to mod, or you have to be a game programmer or something. But in reality, I think your story is pretty common, is that people just see like, oh, anybody can do this. Like you can just and then we just kind of jump in and just start learning, and you get hooked, and you just learn more and more until you start reverse engineering what Bethesda did.
Yeah, the phrase of anyone can do this is quite literally my experience entirely. When I first applied for Fallout Miami, I sent them architectural renderings from my senior year architecture course, and I had experience with Google SketchUp, AutoCAD, Revit, and nothing related even remotely to Fallout modding whatsoever.
That's awesome. So how much of it did they actually teach you, or was it self-taught by just like, they're like, here, go download the creation kit and have fun?
So a few names I want to mention. Cooler than the coolest guy right off the bat. When I first sent him my renderings, I was like, hey, I don't know if this is useful. Maybe I can be some sort of architectural advisor or, make components for you guys. I don't know what this will do. And at first he was, a little specky. He's like, these are really good, but how can we use these in our, toolkit? How can we apply these to what we're doing?
Right.
And, he at first kind of mentored me. And he's like, you know what? You can go ahead and give this a try. And if you can produce XYZ things for me, we might be able to bring you on the project, just kind of testing the waters of what I could do.
Sure.
And I had no idea what level design was back then. So bear in mind, I'm trying to become a 3D modeler when I first joined this project, thinking that would be beneficial. So I'm teaching myself 3ds Max, all these obscure programs that my architecture professors have mentioned in the past, but I have never even thought about touching. So I'm sitting over there, trying to reinvent the wheel, it took me 2 months to make a pool fence. I'm sitting there struggling out the wazoo, and then one day I hopped into a voice chat, and this is after I was brought on the project, and I went on this long adventure of a smaller mod project, and then working with New Orleans and a few other little mixed things. But I started talking to Star Cornett, and he's like, "Hey, you should give this level design thing a try, man." And I was like, "Oh, I, I've learned this 3ds Max thing. I made a pool fence in 2 months. Maybe something a little different might be better fit for me." So
yeah, but
I gave it a try, and
I was gonna say, your background still gives you a good space to start with 3D modeling or level design, in the sense that you understand how to work within 3-dimensional space to build things. Because I don't think that's a nature. It's like a native thing we all understand. Even like you had probably worked in CAD, so that's going to give you, at least you can understand the views in 3D Studio and whatnot.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just I'd done 3.5 years of architecture undergrad, and I was over in Australia, yada yada, AutoCAD out the wazoo. But I was like, how can I apply this to modding a video game, for Pete's sake?
Yeah.
And I mean, it's been a long ride. I've learned a lot of things, and I've come to realize that those 3D modelers, they know something that I do not know, and it is really freaking hard. And but level design, oh my God, it has been such a nice change of pace for me, and it's been an outstanding journey.
Yeah, so basically you're setting up the spaces, designing out roughly layout. Did you do the terrain layout then for Miami? Or actually, let's talk about something else that just came up. So I think everybody at this point has seen the Miami early build come up, and so I think there's probably going to be a misconception that this is going to be what you designed, but in reality, that's the one thing that was just released was something that Micah, the original project creator, created, and you guys are now working on something that's based on that, but is totally new. Is that accurate?
Yeah, there was I think it was about 6 months ago, there was a small change in project dynamic, and it was a small little glitch. I know Cascadia ran into this in the past. We were going to run into it if we didn't make some changes, which was the notorious multiple DLC dependency factor of having too many forms inside the CK. With this big, hiccup, there was this split of mindsets of, should we preserve what we currently have, or, start fresh and try our best to, build this on the dynamic of a project we can release to the community. Because at first, for Mika, from my understanding, it was a freelance fun experience of just, what can I do with making Miami for the Fallout universe.
Sure.
And as it started, picking up a lot of momentum, and a lot more people started joining the project, and a lot more mindsets started contributing to this. And I know Constantine had mentioned it started out with 5 guys and a dream, and now it's 45 people all developing different aspects of the project. It started to kind of split apart, and the mindset slowly started changing. And Mika had the biggest approach of wanting to preserve his own work, because he spent a shitload of time. Pardon my French, but he spent a lot of time developing that world space. So it's entirely understandable. He took a break from the project for a little while and has come back, with a fresh mindset, and he's still wanting to develop his world space. And we're entirely okay with that. He's been rather, transparent with us in regards to, using his work and applying his skills and things we've learned from him and how he wanted the world space to be, but at the same time, he can preserve what he wants to do with the project. But
right.
Unfortunate as it is, there is technically 2 separate development paths right now. However, you'll see parts of both, hopefully parts of both in each world space.
Sure. Well, I think his is more, because from what I looked at, because I downloaded it, I haven't loaded it up yet, but just looking at the description and the images, it appears that that's basically, here's the early draft he did when he was showing off screenshots initially that resulted in building up the team, and it's mostly just for exploration. There's not going to be a major quest line or all these factions. Does that seem accurate?
There's fundamentals, and this was another thing as we were going through my experience of level design, is he originally did have a mindset and storyline kind of put in place, and it, of course, had different facets of it that was reinterpolated by the writing department, a few other things. He does, I'm anticipating doing something with NPCs in the future, but his big focus is architectural detail, and you can see that through his world space. It's some of the most gorgeous level design I've ever seen, and right now it is a lot to look at, but I think he does anticipate in the future to start developing a little bit more of those fundamental aspects of it that you'll get with a typical Fallout game. But with time constraints and his in real life schedule, we'll see where that takes him, and I'm sure he's going to remain hopefully rather transparent with his following.
Sure. Well, and I imagine, when you take on something like that yourself, it's a pretty epic journey. So like project could take him quite some time to get to fruition, because even these giant teams, like you guys are operating with 45 people, and I assume actually probably more than that in just random contributions. So,
Oh yeah,
probably
easy.
over throughout the life of the project, there'll probably be 200 people who have touched it, and you guys are it's gonna take you guys quite a while, several years to put this together. So I can imagine how long that the solo project would take, but
Yeah.
either way, it's exciting. It's still exciting to see, and it's cool to get kind of a little sneak peek at some of what to expect, because I imagine that I know for a fact his initial vision and his initial world building is what kind of built the team in the first place. That's what he used to
I mean,
recruit
we
other
would
people.
not be here without that.
For sure. So how much of that? So I know you had mentioned to me earlier that one of the things that you have to deal with constantly with this that's a challenge is the optimization, because you have to deal with previs and LOD, and there's a lot of things that Bethesda does where they kind of morph the terrain knowing about their own limitations of their engine to make sure that there's ample hills and things to block the lines of sight so that they don't have to worry about the player seeing into the void. So how much of that has had to take a cut into what Mika originally developed?
So with Mika's world space and how he was developing it, it was very centralized, and you'll see this if you go through his pre-release. Is not only was it a lot of cutting and pasting his world space, because he has an entirely different art palette than our old lead level designer, and a different art palette than my perspective on the world space.
Okay.
So that was an issue of integrating not only the art styles but the optimization aspects of it. There was a bigger focus on detail and centralizing a lot of things. And now we're going through the process of, pulling out certain aspects and, why did you use a double-sided wall here instead of a single-sided one? And, how can we make this work for the player rather than, making it work on? Because I think someone had mentioned in the past that Mika has like a supercomputer. So
Okay.
it may work for him, but it might not necessarily work for, Joe Schmo living in the outback, not having a computer that runs really well. So
Right.
there's a lot of considerations of optimization and things like that we've been going through as we've been pulling things out and plugging things in. But I think the biggest thing is just analyzing his work, figuring out how we can kind of recreate it and use it, but at the same time, unfortunately, having to cut things in certain instances. But
Sure.
for the most part, we've been able to optimize a decent amount of his work. There's been a few hiccups here and there, but we've been trying our best to follow the Bethesda mod school. I've seen a few of your videos in the past of just how we can make this world space work for the average Joe Schmo Fallout player that wants to enjoy Miami for what it is.
Sure. Because that's it's a tough thing, because I have been in both schools of thought myself. I've gone in times of my life, and it always tends to be of how well am I doing financially in my life at the time of, if I've got a brand new gaming computer, then I get really mad that games get dumbed down for console players, and then when I don't have time or money to invest in a new gaming machine, then I'm like, well, you guys should optimize your games better. So
Yeah.
I can see both sides of the argument there. If you invest in hardware, you want to be able to push it to the max and get the prettiest looking stuff, but most people can't afford to be building new game machines every few years. So like the average, so you tend to have to you almost have to pick what is your target audience, how big of an audience do you want, and then aim for specs accordingly. So if you want to just make it for 30 people, then sure, go for the top of the line. But if you want to hit the broader audience, then you almost have to use Bethesda's target specs as your check.
Unnegotiable. There's a few things with the Boston Commonwealth that were a little spotty with FPS, but for the most part, they spend a lot of time optimizing, pre-combining, doing a lot of things to make sure their games work properly. And there's a lot of additional work that goes into that. And that's something that we're trying to really heavily pick up on now, because we do want this project to come out and be playable by just about anyone.
That's awesome. Well, I think a lot of people want that now after how much hype has been built up around it, and a lot of people expecting some great things out of you guys, and especially because you're as far as I know, you're the only mega mod project doing a world space that is planning on allowing it to be connected to the main game, so that people can continue their journey with their Soul Survivor into another world space, which is really exciting, because that's like one of the biggest draws of Tale of Two Wastelands, is that you get to take your Fallout 3 character and head off to New Vegas and keep playing with them.
Yeah, that's definitely been part of the fun experience of not only our workflow, but how we're connecting things with the Commonwealth. I know some people have seen the foreshadowing to this little town that appears to the south of Boston, but it's been a really fun experience to try and incorporate the Soul Survivor. It's had its obstacles, it's had its benefits, but it's also created a almost fun little familiar taste palette for everyone, to relate to when they see, I can take, my person that got trapped in the vault down to the tropical wasteland.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It gives you that feeling of that your character gets to live on further, because it's
exactly.
always, for me anyway, whenever I play a Bethesda game, I get to a certain point where I just resist doing the main quest, because I'm like, if I do the main quest, I feel like I'm done.
Yep.
And I don't want to be done ever. Like, I just want to immerse myself in this game world forever. So having a whole new world space to go to kind of lets you, live a little longer as your character.
Plus, I mean, with the whole new dynamic of Miami, I mean, the player himself goes on, a journey of, rediscovering, regardless of, the level cap that we set on this, it kind of levels the playing ground, because they are in a whole new environment. I mean, we went to the Boston Commonwealth. We've been up north for quite some time now. But what happens when you throw the player into the dusty sandstorms of the South? What do we see down south that we haven't really seen before? And it creates a whole new dynamic, but at the same time preserving what players like to see, which is, their players living on.
Right.
Character living on.
You definitely get a whole new art palette to work with, because Miami has a very distinct look. It almost has a New Vegas thing going to it. I mean, not necessarily your guys' artwork, but just the glitzy glamour of certain parts of Miami. So I'm very curious to see what direction you guys go with the art. I've seen some of the screenshots and stuff. Obviously, you incorporate the palm trees, a lot of that beach feel, but they've even got their own architecture style. In fact, I think a lot of the 40s and 50s architecture was used very heavily down there. The color palettes and everything are pretty common in Florida.
Florida has Miami Beach specifically, a lot of the storefront, historical aspects that we see with, traditional hotels and Art Deco and all this Googie style architecture that at the time was very streamlined, exactly what Fallout wants, was actually, it's pretty much preserved down in the Miami Beach area. And, they've been trying their best to keep a lot of the more historical parts. So it's tied in perfectly with the, Fallout aesthetic. But the palette is entirely different, because it introduces all these new flavors of, stucco, and how you can incorporate, pastel colors on a new, tropical wasteland type vibe, which from some of the other Fallout games, I mean, I'm sure you've noticed this, it has a much darker appeal. New Vegas had a much more glitzy, as you said before, much more glitzy appeal, and we're slowly starting to see a reoccurring transaction of that with the Fallout Miami dynamic right now. And that's the benefit of it, is we are exploring something that we really haven't delved a whole lot into yet. And that's been part of the fun of, my architectural experience, just going through these old art styles and trying our best to recreate them, because Bethesda provides us the tools, but we have to fill in a lot of the gaps along the way. But it's been fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think Miami is actually perfect for this, because Fallout 4 did something to the color palette that there were a lot of players who were not happy with. I loved it. I love the fact that they went to higher saturation, and they got rid of the green overlay for 3 and the orange from New Vegas. I love that it's full color. And then you just get you get more of a hopeful experience. And I think Miami's color palette, just in general, that tropical vibe, I think fits really well, as a great extension from what they did with Fallout 4.
Yeah, it's definitely just, it has a little bit more life to it. I mean, going through the trailers and looking through, old footage, it's been also interesting to kind of pull apart, as I had stated before, Mika had his own art style. Star Cornet had his own art style. I have my own art style. It's interesting pulling all these different perspectives of what people thought Miami in Fallout universe should be, and how we can kind of tie those all together into one cohesive world space. Because, everyone has different perspectives on this, but, how do we make it unique while at the same time cohesive?
Yeah.
Because we do have a lot of people cycling out of the product, but that's with every big mod project. So.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a constant rotation. You just got to hope you got a strong core who can maintain a vision. Fortunately, you had someone like Mika to start it out and get a vision started, so that you guys have something to kind of rally around, which is pretty awesome. So what are you doing as far as assets to get into there? Are you guys mostly just coming up with new textures to kind of replace a lot of the existing stuff? Because Bethesda has a pretty deep kit of models available, especially for architecture, but or are you guys having to redesign a lot of models and stuff to fit the Miami feel?
Our asset team, I will give massive props to these guys. They have been working religiously on making, unique Miami props and things like that. But it also falls back on the level designer of how we can, take pre-existing assets and make it something entirely new. I'm a big fan of material swaps. If you ever want to talk to me about level design, I am obsessed with material swaps. But it's been interesting to work alongside the asset department and cohesively relate, new texture work along with, how level designers need this certain scene to look and what assets they need specifically, because we have had to fill in a lot of the gaps. And I know you can see this. There was an early pre-release video that Mika did a long time ago of just all the fun little things you could spot that made Miami Miami. But in reality, a lot of the buildings and things like that were just had different lighting on them or different, material swaps. And it was a lot of things that were partially reused, but in a very smart way to where it kind of disguises itself. So the asset team has been working very, very hard, but at the same time, we've been trying our best to prevent a lot of overlap. That's another thing with communicating with other projects and, utilizing assets and, making sure the entire community, that's the benefit of being a part of this community is if someone, makes a really badass looking convertible, we can use that convertible and, we can change that and adapt it and make it a really cohesive part of this universe while at the same time preserving what our palette is and adjusting things as needed. But to answer your question more directly, we have been making a lot of new assets.
yeah, making a lot of stuff. But yeah, it makes sense to want to reuse as much as you can as well. And that is one of the challenges of being a mod designer. And I think it's actually really fun to see how people get creative with the assets that Bethesda's provided and kind of repurpose them and stuff to make new stuff. But one of the things that makes a Fallout experience, I think, is always there's a handful in every world space, in every one of these games, there's always a handful of standout, over-the-top, gigantic props that everybody remembers. There's usually 8 or 9 of them. They're either the centerpiece of a city or they're just some... What did you call them?
Hero assets.
Hero assets, yeah. So I assume you guys have got something like that planned.
Yes,
and what an awesome area to pull from, because everything's going to be completely... Like, there's yet to be a Fallout game in an area like Miami. So you guys basically can kind of go nuts with it.
Yeah, no, the whole aspect of hero assets and you're creating those key money shots and those memorable Fallout moments that you get, with unique settlements, unique locations, that postcard money shot has been a really integral part to choosing what buildings we want to bring from, the real world and recreate in Fallout, or what type of asset we need to create to really trigger that mechanism with the player and make them recognize that scene. And you'll have that moment where they were telling their buddies like, oh, you remember going through that spot, seeing that really badass thing. And that's been an integral part of our process, not only in the level design department but the asset department, how we can use sound design to be able to really sell those perspectives. The writing department's been establishing some really nice foundation work and how we can approach those situations with dialogue. And it's interesting to see how we can make, these really key iconic portions, and every part of the team plays a massive aspect in that development of that specific hero moment or that specific memory moment.
Sure.
And it's been interesting to see what some of those asset creators can pull out, because that is way over my pool fence head.
You just drag those models into their location and say, there you go.
Yes. And I try my best. We are still working heavily on developing the exterior world space to get it to points to releasing a whole bunch of new screenshots, but I've been trying my best to make sure everyone's new assets get to see some light of day and, get to see a cool perspective and how it plays into the level design and things like that. But It's been fun playing around with those new assets as well, because they are really, really badass.
Yeah, for sure. Those are so exciting to see. That was actually when I played 76 for a brief amount of time. That was all I cared about doing. Once it was like, all right, I can't do the MMO gameplay anymore. I'm beyond that in life. But I had to go check out all the big giant set pieces because they're so impressive and so fun to look at.
Yes. Well, I was in Australia at the time, and I remember seeing the price drop on 76, it went from 60 to 40 to 20, and I picked it up right at 20, and this is when I first started jumping in the modding community. I was like, I'm going to buy this game. I might play it for a little bit, but I really just want to look at the level design, to be honest with you. Because 76, you pull away the saturation palettes and things like that, it has some really gorgeous level design moments.
So that giant excavator or whatever it is, that thing is magnificent. Love that thing.
The excavator, the second I saw there was a water park in Fallout, I was like, I need to go there. I need to check it out and see what that is all about.
Yeah. Did you find yourself plenty inspired for getting back into building stuff for Miami after that?
Well, at this moment, I was only an implementer on Miami when I first got a hold of 76, and this is what really started pushing me to be like, hey, maybe I should consider level design. Maybe this whole putting textures into the game, making sure assets work is really important, and I can do that on top of level design. But this kind of ties in more to what I really like doing, which is architecture, and how I can fill in those gaps of what does a water park look like in the Fallout world? What does a I don't even know what it's like. What does an excavator look, or what does a mining department look like? What do those little things look like in the Fallout world? And that's what 76 did really well, is it filled in a lot of those gaps for us. And now we're trying our best to kind of introduce those to our games. It was funny watching the asset team kind of freak out when 76 came out, because they're sitting there. It's like, oh crap, we need to remake this little thing here because this is actually what Bethesda did.
Oh, that's kind of funny. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. For me and a couple people on our team, the concern was, oh God, is this, before we knew it was multiplayer, it was like, oh God, are we about to lose our whole audience before we finish our new project? Because that's kind of a real thing. Like when New Vegas came out, like the Fallout 3, like the number of people playing Fallout 3 dropped dramatically. And same thing from New Vegas to Fallout 4. It's like anybody who hadn't finished their projects yet lost a huge chunk of potential players, which is. Mm-hmm. It's there's always this thing of almost a balance where you get a lot of mod authors claiming I did this for myself, and that's all. I partially believe people when they say that, because you definitely have to have some personal, some strong motivation and personal passion to do this. But at the same time, you put in all that effort because you want to impress other people, and the more people you can impress with your work, the better it feels. So losing those audiences can be a substantial drain on motivation.
Yeah. A substantial drain on public relations and motivation, and just getting the community involved. Although a lot of modding projects like to keep a lot of their development process very restrictive, it's always satisfaction. It's always a satisfaction of posting a teaser picture and getting 200 smiley faces on it, or just knowing people are keeping track.
We're getting 6 million views on that trailer.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, that was definitely a big jump scare for the higher development team. I wasn't a part of the team at the point, but I mean just.
Well, you got sucked in. You got sucked into the hype with that.
I got sucked into it, most definitely. I mean, it was.
So, what's your relationship with Miami in general? Like, have you been a fan of the architecture in general before? Have you lived there? Like, what was your draw to the Miami aspect of it?
The whole Miami aspect, I think the big thing that really drew me there is I'm from the Midwest. I've lived in the Midwest for 22 years. It's been a real hoot of a time, but Miami is something unique, dynamic. It's badass. It's tropical. It's fun. It's out of this world. And for the most part, I've actually never been down to Florida before. For me to kind of start jumping into what that is and being able to, dissect it and pull apart those little things and look at it through Google Images, because I don't know about you. I don't have a whole lot of money to travel down to Miami soon, but it's been fun for me to kind of experience a part of the U.S. through a modding project and being able to dissect what it is and understand what it is without actually having to go there.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, when I first started modding, I was part of a really, a smaller, New Orleans project, and I really, really liked the South in Fallout. And it was just such a cool new dynamic, and I really wanted to explore, what more Miami was. And I mean, you can't deny it's got gorgeous architecture. It's got an outstanding dynamic. It's got that very heavy Miami Vice vibe. It's got everything you need rolled up in one margarita for you. It's a cocktail of madness, but at the same time, it is such a unique dynamic, and there's so much to explore and so much to look at. I mean, just going through Google Images and Google Maps itself is just a fun little journey, just to piece together what this place is.
Sure.
I mean, it's
Miami and just like Vegas, as soon as I saw that as the title of the video, I'm like, that's a perfect location for a Fallout game. It just feels like it should have a Fallout game, because it's almost just like Vegas has like the old strip still preserved today. Miami has a lot of that going on too, where it's a lot of the old 50s stuff is still preserved in the feel of the whole city. So it's like it's so easy to make that transition, because you can you can imagine it. Like, you get to keep that one foot in reality, so it makes it just feel right away.
No, I entirely agree. And speaking of the New Vegas trip, I am stoked to see what Fallout 4 New Vegas does. I just want to put that out there. Those guys over there have been doing outstanding work, and I'm eager to see what they do with the strip.
I agree. I mean, did you see that video they did with Doc Mitchell where they redid the whole opening? That machine? Oh my God, it's so good. It's so good.
The second I talked to Grant. I don't know if you've ever talked to the product lead over at Fallout 4 New Vegas. He's a great guy. The second I was able to talk to him, be like, dude, what y'all are doing is badass, by the way, but what are you doing on the New Vegas trip? He's like, can't tell you anything just yet, but we got some pretty special treats in store. And, him and I have talked about architecture in the past and things like that. But I mean, it's just so cool to see these worlds recreated in the Fallout dynamic. And I mean, being able to explore a slice of that without actually having to go there and interpolate it in our own way, because video games nowadays, a good example of this, and we realized this when I don't know if you keep track of international news, but when the French church burnt down, Notre Dame.
Yeah,
that was a big scare in the architectural community. What's going to happen to it, blah blah blah. But then there was this news article that popped up. Assassin's Creed had gone through and 3D scanned like this entire building, so they had enough information to recreate this building based off of what video games had. And being able to hear that and understand, where video games have come and how we can recreate these dynamic world spaces and experience them without actually having to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, that is just, it is absolutely crazy. Absolutely crazy.
Yeah, the Notre Dame thing was terrible to see, but it was crazy how quickly the world kind of united to take care of the problem. Like, I think they raised like $900 million or something like that to restore it. It's just like just unbelievable amount of money to restore it.
Oh, easy. And there was the big debate in the architecture community, should they preserve what it was or, recreate it to, something new, modern? Because I don't know if you know this, but with Europe, in the medieval era, a lot of the trees and things that existed in Europe aren't there anymore. And the Notre Dame Cathedral is built out a lot of that old style wood that just doesn't exist. So, there's the big debate of, if they recreate it, are they going to recreate it the proper way that it should be done? Should it have a new modern twist? Should it be something to commemorate? What should we do with it? And although I didn't necessarily agree with the outcome of, recreating it perfectly to what it is, I mean, it was interesting to see that whole process of, throwing a little stone in the cognitions of reality and seeing, what becomes of a piece of architecture when something of such catastrophe happens. But it was cool to see the whole video game incorporation of things. I was like, of course, Assassin's Creed would 3D scan the entire thing. And, we'd be able to use it in some way, shape, or form.
That was at the height of Assassin's Creed's. Well, I guess they're getting a resurgence, but I remember like when that one was coming out, their team was massive. They would throw like 400 people at an Assassin's Creed games, and their budgets were ridiculous.
And they were pushing them out. I haven't paid attention to Assassin's Creed whole heavily until the revolutionary one. I forget the name of it. And it was Assassin's Creed 3.
Yeah.
But I mean, just watching those games come out, and I mean, it was, again, a new taste to what a world used to be.
Yeah.
And it's the same concept, with Fallout. My favorite part of these games is just trying to piece together what happened before those bombs fell. Figure out, what this world space was before this happened. And it's the same thing with those Assassin's Creed games, Is this what it was like back in the day? What does this building look like? This is what the streetscapes were like. I mean, some of the funnest parts of those games isn't necessarily, just completing all the main quests, but it's exploring all these dynamic world spaces and, seeing the old-style medical doctors with the crow masks. Like
those are awesome. Yeah, I used to be way into the Assassin's Creed games just for the historical fact, but then I just got tired of the gameplay personally because I can only do that gameplay loop so many years in a row of because they were adding little tweaks here and there, but for the most part, it was like, all right, I've played enough of this. You guys got me for 4 or 5 titles.
A little bit of rinse, dry, repeat. But I mean, some of the world spaces they were doing were just gorgeous. I mean, even if you plug in one of the old Assassin's Creeds, although every other building might look the same, it was still dynamic. It was unique. It was an opportunity for you to explore an open world in a historical sense. I think it introduced a new facet of history that makes it really, really interesting. I'm a big documentarian. I love watching these things and, finding out what's behind history and things like that. And I think Assassin's Creed did a really nice job of, introducing history to that younger generation and how you can kind of teach people lessons of history and, let them explore these worlds in a fun and creative way.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what makes these games awesome.
Yeah, I still don't think those games aren't awesome. I just had to personally stop playing them. And I think I would have the same problem if Fallout had yearly releases. Like, we're always clamoring for more Fallout. But I think, Bethesda's 7 to 10 years between games is a little much. But I could definitely see, wanting to take like a couple years off between titles to like, rinse your palate of that gameplay so that you can be ready for a fresh take on it.
I agree, and everyone always needs more Fallout, but it also gives opportunities for some modding projects to be able to fill in the gaps along the way.
Yeah, for sure. It'll be very interesting to see which game, because there's something different that's going on now with Fallout 4 versus past games, and even Skyrim has already taken advantage of this, I think, is that the skills and tools required to make game content are becoming very cheap and available for the masses. Like, it's easy to get, thanks to things like YouTube and stuff. It's very easy to spread information far and wide. The tools have been streamlined because games as a development and like medium have become kind of so normalized and streamlined that it's easier to teach those tools to new people, that I think we're like, Skyrim has shown the first time where you're seeing a lot of those super ambitious mod projects actually get finished. Whereas, some of them, like a lot of the older games, that people would announce this stuff all the time, and it was like once in a great while would you see one actually make it to completion. So I'm really curious to see if all the big projects from Fallout 4 will make it all the way to the finish line.
And, only time will be able to tell those types of mysteries to us of, will these products ever see light of day? What type of errors will be coming to the future? When's the next Fallout game going to come out?
Right.
Throw a wrench at everyone. But, I mean, for the most part, it's, I don't know. It's been interesting to see how much the modding community has changed. I mean, personally, I've only been a part of it for a year, so I don't know if I can vouch for everyone. But, I mean, just going to show I was able to move up to a leadership position, and the opportunities that I've had over the course of just a year is absolutely nuts. Being able to pick up the skill sets that I've been able to pick up purely through watching videos like the ones you put out, the ones other developers have put out. I mean, in the past, you didn't really have that. I remember how hard it was. I may have just been, silly goose, but trying to figure out how to install my first Minecraft texture pack was the most just intense thing in the world for me. My buddy goes, you have to get Optifine, you have to get this and that and this, that. And it was just way over my head.
Yeah.
But, nowadays, that's so streamlined. It's so easy to do. And a nice thing about all these bigger developers is they're like, hey, our fans are making really cool shit. Let's make it a little bit easier for him. So they're giving us access to a lot of these tools that you wouldn't have seen years ago.
Oh, absolutely. Like the fact that the creation kit shipped with an exporter from 3D Studio Max to their model format was like, oh, holy crap, didn't expect that. Because usually we are in the community are stuck trying to reverse engineer these tools. And then it ends up being like a year or two after the game has already been modded heavily that people kind of crack that code. And then all the early mods then start to look crappy because it's like, now we have all the new tools. And so you usually go through that phase. With Fallout 4, we didn't have as much of that. Aside from a few things with the animation, most of the stuff we needed to do all the cool things were released immediately with the creation kit.
Which is, I mean, extremely beneficial because at the same time, I mean, I think with 76 it's interesting to see, how they've kind of waited to release those tools to the community. But at the same time, it's interesting to just give access to that open toolkit because everyone has different mindsets with these video games. I mean, a big thing we saw change dynamic wise with Fallout 4 was the whole introduction of settlements, which I'm sure you know something about settlements, but for the most part it was this whole new idea to be able to build world spaces, and it opened up that toolkit to, it's like you can do this in game, and we've kind of made it a little bit more modular, but you can also do this on the side and make your own world space and what you can do with that. And it's been a fascinating ride to just see where this has all come from. I mean, in the past, it was notorious if you could jerry rig an Xbox 360 to be able to change your color on Call of Duty Online on your username. But now it's everyone's tearing apart these games like it's their business, and it's so much easier to do nowadays. And it's just
absolutely. Yeah, and it is awesome to see when companies support it. Like when Bethesda put it right into the game, like with the mod menu, and obviously it's not a whole lot different than like what Blizzard did with their kind of arcade thing a long time ago, where people could create crazy maps. Like Dota came from a Warcraft 3 mod, and that like companies like that have always supported, but it's not quite the same. Like those are a little bit different than the way something like Fallout works or like Skyrim with the open world games, just because having the toolkit to bust into an open world game is something else.
It's just really fascinating, and I don't know. I mean, me being from my background with AutoCAD and things like that, it's a little bit more modular than what my usual taste is, but at the same time, it's cool to just piece things together. And it's always fun hopping in voice chat with programmers and other developers that are on different parts of the project and seeing what their workflows are. Because level design is within itself is very heavily design based, but at the same time there's all these other aspects of the CK that I don't even know about yet.
Yeah,
I don't even think I'll ever be able to wrap my head around it.
Well, and there's probably a lot of the stuff that you have to be made aware of, at least cursory, just so that you don't make basic mistakes. So, for example, you have to be aware of the fact that they have to be able to nav mesh of certain widths NPCs are going to need to travel, where are the paths the main quest is going to be going on, and things like that. So you end up being involved with a lot more than just architecture in that.
No, yes, and that's a big thing that I've been slowly trying to integrate my team with the level design department. Is a lot of people like the design aspects of things, but there's also this whole new issue of optimization and all these little fixits that make that world space actually work. So how do I get my team introduced? Sometimes we call it the boring stuff, but I really am into the design aspect of it. But optimization is a really important part of it. Someone's got to do that work. So
yeah, that's always a challenge, I think, on these teams is dividing up the boring work in such a way that one person doesn't carry too much of it and burn out. It's like that's always it's a tough line to walk.
And it's another thing I've been talking. I mean, you had Simon on your podcast. You haven't released that one just yet because of some news we are going to be.
That's right. We talked about something we weren't supposed to.
Yeah. He was telling me about that, and he goes, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't have mentioned that." I was like, "Oh, yeah, it's all right. It's whatever." But it's interesting talking with these guys because everyone comes from different mindsets. And the nice thing with Simon and the programming department, I mean, DIFM, all those guys, white collar, is I've brought up the discussion with them. It's like, hey, we need help with this level design thing. They're like, well, we'd love to do it, but we don't have the design mindset to be able to do this stuff. We'll do all the boring crap for you if you give us the work we want to work with. And it's like being able to open up that dialogue and distribute information and being able to talk back and forth with all these different departments and finding people's strengths and weaknesses and pulling out, this person's time schedule is really heavy, so let's get their design work out, and we don't mind optimizing that. It's interesting to just see how everything kind of correlates, and occasionally everyone needs to bite the bullet every once in a while and, do the boring stuff. But it's...
Well, and a project of the scale you guys are doing, I don't think it's even something you can delay. You kind of have to have that integrated into your flow. So one of the things with the way we've done our development is because we've been doing everything in chunks, so like we've got this grand vision for the mod and we're just releasing it in expansions over time. We tend to just save up all the boring work for right before release of each expansion. So that's been nice. But on a project to scale at Miami, you guys kind of have to just make it part of your daily lives. Otherwise, you're going to have 2 years of optimization work left over at the end.
Yep. And that's been something that I've been starting to push more heavily for. The programming department I've been working a lot more cohesively with and just trying to get that in mind as we're designing things moving forward. And that was a big thing when we were pulling things out of Mika's world space was optimization. How do we get it to work with our world space? How do we prevent walking from this block to this block and not having a massive drop in FPS? How do we create a jungle without having without putting a million trees? And those are all little things that have just kind of come along the way with us as we've been developing things, because it's one thing to design something, but if you can't get it to work, no one's going to give a shit.
Now, are you the type of person that you're inspired by challenges like that, or do they kind of annoy you?
Within certain instances, yes. There's fun aspects of optimization and being able to keep things clean, concise, and work. But at the same time, there's very big tedious parts of it and very big hiccups that you have to overcome. And I am really, for a while there, I was only doing implementation work for Miami, and that really interested me of how you can get things to work within the CK. But for the most part, I mean, those types of challenges are just an on-case basis type of thing, because it can be really tedious when having to place, a whole bunch of occlusion planes in a building that should have been optimized properly to begin with, versus, going through and figuring out a quick and easy solution to be able to make, LOD. I mean, when I first figured out how to do LOD, 6 or 8 months ago, it was the most fascinating thing to me, because I never really had pulled apart what a video game was and, how you can get things to optimize and how you can get all those little moving parts to really function together. But there's tedious things with any form of optimization, with any form of design, with any form of development, regardless. They're going to be there. They're going to come up. Someone's got to bite the bullet and do them. And the nice thing with, leadership on the Miami team is, I'm not saying 9 times out of 10, but 9 times out of 10, we try our best to be able to pick up a lot more of those boring tasks to try and keep a lot of the lower level developers, or not leadership developers, involved with the project and being able to do fun things that will help them in their professional curriculum, while we at the same time are developing ourselves more as leaders, but at the same time, refining the project more to be able to get it to the community just in general, which is, of course, one of our biggest motivators.
Yeah. No, I think that's very admirable. I think that that's a great way to lead in general, is if, don't give somebody else a job that's so crappy you wouldn't be willing to do it yourself. is kind of something I've always tried to live by. I know
Yeah.
plenty of people on my team will tell me I don't do good enough job because there are bad jobs that other people have to do. But
Sure.
But yeah, I think that's a good attitude though, of taking that on, of like, you know what, if we want to see this project make it to completion, we can't just have every new person who comes along take these horrendous jobs and burn out.
Exactly. That's been one of my biggest things. We put out a big advertisement for level designers because I was trying to get the department to grow again. And, how we can get the cogs moving again, because we had a few hiccups here and there, but we cleaned everything up with that.
Yeah.
Was how to get people motivated to work on stuff. And I've started a few volunteer organizations in college, with my fraternity and a few other things like that. And how do you get people motivated when you're not paying them money? It gets very difficult. And, you can have pure-hearted motivation to work on something out of the kindness of your heart. But if you're telling some guy to place, a trillion generic buildings, that gets boring very, very quickly. So I've been trying my best to remain rather open with, my development department specifically, and be like, what types of tasks do you guys want to do? And I'll tailor your tasks to things you want to work on.
Yeah.
Rather than giving you, baloney task of, I needed to make 14 city blocks that all look the same. It's like, well, that can get really boring really quickly, and that's how people taper off and get less interested in projects.
Yeah.
And it's just tailoring things to their needs, and then over time, when you start getting to know your team and start figuring out what their strengths and weaknesses are, you can eventually open up that dialogue. It's like, all right, guys, we really need to get this part of the world space done. It's not the most fun thing in the world, but we need to make sure it gets done. And XYZ people will be like, you know what, we've been able to do fun tasks in the past. We know this needs to get done. Let's sit down, buckle up, make sure this gets finished. And it's just being able to open up that dialogue and get people on the same page of, there's fun parts of a product, but there's also boring parts of a project.
Yeah.
And everyone's got to bite the bullet, but it is I've come to realize this is extremely poor decision to give really boring tasks to new developers, because they're not going to want to do that. No one's going to want to do that.
And you know what? I gotta pause and say, Sir Locke, if you're listening, thank you for doing so much crappy work with me. Sir Locke is somebody who, he's a rare soul. I'm sure you've had these too, who came to me and said, hey, I want to help out with the project, and I'm willing to do really crappy tasks. And I was like, yes, I can share the crappy tasks with somebody. And those people are rare, awesome people. But I think your point of like making sure people can feel inspired is really important on these big projects if you want to get to the end. And I think that giving people the opportunity to like show off their artistic skills and have some like really cool things that they can then add to their portfolio is a huge deal.
That's another big thing is, a lot of developers on these projects, I've been talking to and fro people from time and time again. I'll open up the dialogue with someone and be like, hey, this is really cool. You should put this in your portfolio, and be like, well, I really don't have one. It's like, what do you want to do after this type of project? Where does this take you? Yeah. And opening up that dialogue for, what this project means to, a developer. Is it just a hobby thing, or is it something they want to take into, the job world, the professional world? And being able to be a resource for people is another big thing I've been pushing for recently, is giving them those tasks that they're going to enjoy, they're going to put the wholehearted, effort into, and having something they're going to be proud of to put in their portfolio, and hopefully get a job doing something that they love one day. And that's been something I've been really, really pushing for, because I have a portfolio from school. I don't necessarily need a massive portfolio. I'm not saying my work is the God tier, but I want people to be able to enjoy the product for what it is, do fun things, and, one day be like, hey, I designed this part of the game, and this is really cool, and I really enjoyed designing X, Y, and Z thing. Not, I designed these 5 generic buildings in the background. Like, no one's going to care, but if you have a money shot, it's got the little tag in the corner, Miami development team. It's like, hey, I designed that entire scene. That's what motivates people.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, even outside of the portfolio, like I tend to just use the phrase portfolio or demo reel just in the general sense, because I think, like what you said, like, just having this thing you can show off just to your like friends and family, to be like, hey, check out this thing I did after it's been touched and polished by the entire team, is it can look pretty badass. It would be like, if you're a random CGI guy on a movie and you get to show the final scene to your family members, be like, look what I did. Like, that's really awesome.
It's really, really awesome. And, being able to ask questions, be part of a team that genuinely wants to help you, refine yourself as a professional is something that I just think it motivates people. And that's what was a big thing, when we started a volunteer organization in my college, was how do you get people wanting to join something that they aren't getting paid for? It's going to take a long time to get done, but at the same time, wanting them to show up to every meeting, show up, finish every task. And it's just part of that dynamic of getting to know your team and introducing them and finding their strengths and weaknesses. And identifying those things, and at the same time, if someone's like, hey man, I'm really struggling with this task, I'll be willing to be like, hey man, just put it down, pick up a new task, try something fresh, and I'll go ahead and take a stab at it. And that's another perk of having a lot of team members is if someone really doesn't like something, don't make them do it, because they're not going to do it. I mean, they're not getting paid to do it.
Right. Yeah, it's a tough line to walk there, because also at the same time, you said like you've got to have a team mentality that if too many people decline all of the work, and then the same people get stuck with the crappy jobs over and over again, then there's resentment can start to form, and that's so yeah, it's a tough line to walk. I don't envy all the people in management on any of the big teams, just because it can be such a struggle. It's something that I personally have dealt with on the receiving end more than on the Sims Elements is my first time being kind of a big manager on a mod project, and it's very tough. And I know there's always tons of room for improvement on our end, on the leadership side of like doing better about what you're describing there, because that's
sure.
I think there's always people who are dissatisfied. There's always people who are happy to take on more, and I guess it's just a matter of communication and trying to figure it out. Have you found any secrets in that have helped you through managing the management team, or the section of the management team you're involved with?
The biggest thing for motivating, level design and just, it's just talking with people. It's one thing to get to work with your coworkers. It's another thing to get to know who they are as people. And with volunteer projects, we have a lot of passionate people wanting to devote their time to this. Be able to talk to people about that. Be able to hop in a voice chat while y'all are grinding away on, as I said, boring shit. But when we're all grinding away on boring shit, being able to talk about, how their days were, what they were up to, or and getting to make friends along the way, and identifying, again, like I said, strengths and weaknesses, and at the same time, be a resource for people. It's like, hey, man, I want to put this in my portfolio, but I'm not too sure it looks good. It's like, well, let's make that good. Let's make you proud of it. Let's make these things, a part of something that you want to show off to people. And I think the biggest thing is just talking to people. Communication is one of the biggest recipes for, success, is getting everyone on the same page, but being able to have conversations, where people feel comfortable, talking to you about stuff, or being like, hey, I really don't like this task right now, and, XYZ people have been giving me some really poor criticism on it, and it kind of bothers me. It's like, well, let's address it. Let's solve the issue. Let's figure out how we can overcome these things, rather than I'm going to stop working on this project entirely because, I don't like this thing, and this thing. It's like, well, let's change those things. Let's figure out why we can keep you on the project, what makes this fun. And in a shorter sense, it's just communication. That's the biggest recipe for identifying with your team and getting people on task and getting people motivated and getting them resources if they're having issues with something. It's all just part of the recipe for success.
Sure. So you touched on something there that's, I think, is a common problem in group projects, especially when you've got art involved. And this is something I know everybody struggles with this in a team environment, is getting the correct amount of criticism and making sure that it's constructive. Because I think everybody who's in some sort of design type work where they're building something that is subjective, you want to get enough feedback to make sure you're doing good, so that you're always improving yourself. You want to get a good feedback loop going. But at the same time, if the criticism comes too heavy, too quick, or hits something you thought you did well,
Yep.
it can have the reverse effect and totally derail you. Have you found a lot of that, and how do you protect yourself and your team from getting into that bad cycle, the opposite side of constructive criticism?
So because we have a lot of critiques in school, and identifying with this and figuring out, critiques suck. I'm not gonna lie, critiques always suck because they're identifying everything that's wrong with your project. But at the same time, the benefits of having these critiques is, this is poor, but it's also identifying, here's what's good about this. Here's how we can make this better. Here's what this is built, and working alongside people and being able to identify those things. And how do you protect yourself from these types of critiques is asking the question, not so much of I don't like this, reciprocating with, why don't you like it? What can I do to make it better? What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on that? And opening up that conversation rather than having it be a plainer, this is bad, get rid of it. This is bad, get rid of it. This is bad, get rid of it. It's like, well, this, may be rough, but how do we make it better and how do we make it great? Rather than just, because another thing with volunteer projects is you don't want anyone's work to go to waste. You never want anyone's work to go to waste. Because it's one thing, time, I always call it time is money, but at the same time, volunteer projects, people are committing time out of their days, time away from their families, time away from doing, things in real life. How do you utilize people's work even though it may not be the strongest in the world? And, being able to open up that dialogue and want people to grow as, professionals and developers and overcome obstacles. And I just think the biggest thing is always asking the question, why don't you like this? How do I make it better? How do I fix this? And if they can't answer that question, then, then it's not, I wouldn't necessarily consider it proper criticism, because it's not benefiting anyone just to tell someone their work is bad and there's no way to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those interesting things, because I think all of us who are creators, we do want people to tell us when stuff's bad. It's just always that you always kind of, when you ask for people's opinion, you're like, oh, I hope they don't hit on something I was really proud of.
Yeah.
That can agree. Definitely happen. And sometimes one of the interesting things about working on a mod in that regard is occasionally, because I've definitely had this happen myself, where I code something, I'm like, oh, that came out really awesome, and I'll show it to somebody, and they'll be like, oh, why doesn't this work that way? A lot of times I have the fail-safe of, I can blame Fallout of like, well, I can't. There's only so much I can do with the UI. It's limited. I know it's not, that part's not particularly good. Which is kind of funny. And I actually think, what are your thoughts on this? So one of the things I have a problem as a creator sometimes is if I sit down with too blank a palette, it's intimidating and I don't know how to get started. And one of the cool things that working on a mod provides is a lot of those boundaries are already set for you because you're working in somebody else's game. So a lot of the things that maybe would be open variables that you have to solve, you don't have to anymore because they've already been put in place. Or in the case of the design work, the whole world's already been established, so there's a lot of reference material you can go to if you get stuck on something. What are your thoughts on that? Do you feel the same intimidation at a blank slate? Like when you opened up the world space for the first time, was it intimidating? And do you find the restraints of working in somebody else's world freeing, or do you find that obnoxious and you wish you didn't have so many things to be held down by?
There's a healthy balance of both, because identifying a big thing that we wanted to do a couple months back was identify regions within the Miami world space, and how we can start blocking out those things and getting things on a visual palette, because I'm a very big visual thinker. And when someone establishes a world space based off of not so much visual thinking, it becomes hard for communication, but also extremely intimidating, because you're sitting there trying to piece together what their thought process was. So being able to get in a palette that I can kind of figure out, wrap my head around, makes it a whole lot easier. But at the same time, there's restrictions, but there's also some freelance to it and some opportunities to be able to design yourself. And that's when the real big questions start popping up. What do I do here? How do I make it cohesive? How does this building that I'm designing work with the world space? And being able to identify those things along the way is nice being on a mod project, because if you have a question, you can always ping, XYZ people, and they'll hopefully have an answer for you. Very rarely have I ever come across an instance where someone's told me we don't have anything developed for that spot yet. It's, well, I might be able to send you some documents for this, or, someone made a music piece for that, or, we have a couple assets composed for that, but we haven't really thought about what the building's going to look like yet. And being able to open up that discussion is just extremely important. It can be intimidating in certain instances, but at the same time extremely beneficial, because it does help identifying, as we call in architecture, the program for a building space. Identifying, this is going to be a post office, or this is going to be a bowling alley. We have X, Y, and Z things already done with it. You just need to fill in all the gaps in between. And that just makes the entire design process easier, but it also can make it detrimenting in certain instances where you're, conflict of interest, but you get that with just about any design perspective. Someone's going to envision how an apple looks entirely different than, the person to the left or to the right of you, but at the same time, with our dynamic world space, it's being able to identify the relationships between things and bring those out more cohesively working together. So I think the biggest thing about our world space, and about world spaces in general, is there's restrictions, there's bounds, there's opportunities for design, but there's also a really nice benefit of having a clear, concise palette to work with and being able to identify and make things cohesively work together.
Sure. Now, do you guys feel like you're at a that was great. Do you feel like you're at a good point in that in region design? Like, do you have your regions figured out in a at least a rough framework now?
I am proud to say yes, because my biggest push when I first moved into a leadership position, which was about a month and a half ago, was we have all these outstanding documents, all these outstanding music pieces. Let's start identifying where all these things go. Let's start getting everything on a visual palette. So I made a big push for getting our entire world space blocked out. With Mika's mindset, it was a big focus on detail, and develop as we move along. Star Cornet had a big focus on partial blockouts, block out one region, then move to the next. my biggest motivation, let's get the whole world space blocked out. So, if I'm not around to help develop this, 2 years down the road due to, life constraints or whatever, someone can pick up those pieces and figure out what the thought process was at the time rather than having to start clean slate.
Sure.
So the benefit was just getting things blocked out and figured out and identifying with that visual representation because from a design perspective, as I had stated before, I'm a really big visual thinker. You give me a paragraph of text, I can read it all day, but if you draw me a sketch, I'll have an entirely different understanding of how something works. And this was a benefit of me being in architecture school is whenever a professor, has an idea, we'll crack out the whiteboard and we'll start drawing that idea. Very rarely do we ever just type out paragraphs and try and, just talk back and forth. We always try and open up that dialogue to maybe this is what it should look like. And that's the benefit of working on this team is everyone has all these different mindsets, but it's interesting seeing how all those work together and how you can actually explore new ways to approach design. And it's been interesting to see how buildings have defined themselves based off of, music pieces or based off of a particular hero asset, based off of a writing dialogue. All these things have been extremely interesting design perspectives for me because they're all new mindsets on how to approach an idea. And I call them new clients because if a writer's like, we need to make it this way, it's like, okay, I have my proposal. How do I actually turn that into a dynamic world space and make it cohesively work with everything else?
So if I were to give you a map of Miami world space, like if we had it on a whiteboard right now, could you draw out little icons for each of the hero icons or hero assets? You know where they're going. You know where the major cities are. You have all that plotted out.
I'd have to take a look at our asset trail board because our asset team, like I said, has been kicking ass, but we have a shitload of assets. So there's a few hero ones I can identify with and know exactly where they go within our world space right now. I would feel fairly confident with that because the world space has been defined now. We have defined where regions are, where these buildings are going. So yes, I would feel confident doing that.
Interesting, because what I'm getting at is it's always hard to judge internally where you are on a project of this scale. Like, if anybody were to ask anybody on your team, how much longer do you have to develop? None of you could give an accurate answer. It's very, very hard to gauge, especially at this phase, knowing that you're all volunteers, knowing that, people will come and go. You'll go through, floods and droughts and development. So it's really hard to judge that. But getting a perspective of like where you are in the workflow in that way, I can kind of visualize how far along you guys are just from my own experience doing stuff like this. And like that is definitely, once you get to that point, you almost feel like it's a personal milestone when you get to the point where, all right, we've got all the major pieces blocked out, then you can kind of start sprinting from there. It's almost like, all right, I can see the finish line. Like there it is. It all makes sense. Cause I think that what you're describing there of blocking it all out is a really good move just for motivation so that people can I think it helps with setting a cohesive vision in the team so that everybody can see exactly what you're aiming for. Whereas early on in the process, and I know we're still in that phase for our current project, before that phase rather, we're in that phase still of like there's a bunch of people who have loose ideas of what we're headed toward, but really it's mostly only in my head, and I have to try and explain it to people, and I'm not always doing a great job. But there's a certain point, especially with world spaces, I think, where you can just show them. It's like, this is what we're building. You guys get it now? Like, now we're all on the same page.
Exactly. And that's been a really big benefit of Trello. An old level designer that's part from the project recently due to some time constraints, things like that. Him and I worked really cohesively with getting everything just down on task boards, getting everyone just on the same page, getting documentation of everything, getting people communicating, getting all this information just... I'll give props to Trello. I don't know if you guys use Trello, but Trello is the nicest thing.
I don't know who started it, but I think so. Like we got Trello from the Skywind team. So I'm wondering like how many different teams throughout Bethesda modding have been responsible for sharing that with each other to like, because there's a lot of people who worked on the older Bethesda games who are now working on these Fallout 4 teams. It'd be interesting to trace like how we all got onto Trello because it seems to me that's a pretty common one.
It is. It is the nicest thing in the world, and with the visual thinkers we can post photos on there. I can post reference photos. I can put 200 reference photos on one Trello card. I'm not saying I've done that, but I could do it if I wanted to. Yeah. And that's the benefit of all this. Even if it's just, a few cubes outlining where a building's at, I can take a picture of that and be like, this is what it needs to look like. This is where it needs to go. These are all of the checkmark options that we need to get done for it. This is what it needs to be in a couple of months. This is where we want to get to it. This is... how we want to approach a certain spot. This is high priority, low priority, medium priority. This is a secondary location, primary location, and just identifying all those things was just a really big push for when I started moving into a leadership position, because the framework was there from Mika. The framework was left over from Star Cornet because they were both outstanding in what they did, but it was a matter of just getting that final little, obstacle overcome of just identifying those regions and getting all that documentation down. And I'll give props to good buddy of mine, Trey Rom. Like I said, he's no longer in the product, but he and I worked really cohesively with just getting all that documentation rolling and just getting all that information out there. So even if I'm not here in, 2 years or, a year down the road, someone can come by and be like, here's what they were thinking. We know exactly where this is at, and we know what we have to do in this spot to make sure it happens.
Sure.
And that's the awesome thing about documentation and, filling out a Trello and putting all these images and things like that. But
yeah,
I'm a big fan of Trello.
Yeah, I've become a big fan of it. It was something I was reticent to at the beginning. I think Trello is actually, and tools like it are a double-edged sword, I'm finding. I'm curious what your opinion on this part is. So one of the things we've found that becomes a problem is there are some people, like I'm one of them, who thrive on lists. Like if I have a list of what I have to do, I can break it down into tiny tasks and I can just go to town on it. Other people, when they see a giant list, they melt into indecision hell, where they're uninspired because there's just it's so much.
There's a lot of things. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you find a balance with that? Is this a matter of identifying which team members fall into which space and helping them deal with that, or like how do you handle that part? Because I imagine you guys have the same issue of there's certain people who see that and it demotivates them.
Yeah. There's definitely instances, as I said before, there's the I called it minor priority, medium priority, and high priority. The high priority locations are the big ones on our Trello board that have a lot of images, a lot of thought process rolling on them. The low priority ones, or some of our cells, they're listed in the CK, but they haven't really been identified on our Trello yet, is just breaking it up into bite-sized pieces in that milestone factor you were discussing, of just keeping people motivated without overwhelming them with too much, and being able to identify, me as a leadership member. It's like, okay, we need these 3 world spaces to actually start progress on. I'm going to go more refine these blockouts so people can start thinking about them more. I could go through all day and sit there and refine, block out, but there's certain instances where it's identifying what's high priority, what needs to be focused on, what doesn't need to be focused on. While at the same time, if a developer comes up to me and it's like, hey, I really like working on beaches. We got a dude that loves beaches right now, which is freaking awesome. He's like, I really like working on beaches. I want a beach task. It's like, well, we haven't really thought about it a whole lot, but I'll kind of get something whipped together for you so you can start thinking about it. And just having, a core value of primary ideas and then tertiary ones, and then refining what our current development process is like based off of what developers we have available and what they want to work on. So breaking it up into bite-sized pieces is definitely something we've been pushing heavily for. Is, of course, getting the entire world spaces blocked out is really important, but it's also identifying what spaces need to be more refined and what need to be left as marble pillars for now.
Right. Well, yeah, and one of that touches on another thing that I think comes up often in these projects is it sounds like you guys had a disagreement, not necessarily a disagreement, but you had different visions on what level of detail to go on this, not just for optimization purposes, but there's also a something that can occur, and I've seen this in some other mods, is that occasionally they will put so much detail in everything that then it makes it hard for any individual thing to stand out. That's another little interesting aspect of this, is that occasionally that some of that stuff where you put it as lower priority and left those things to be less detailed will actually pay off in the end, because when you get to, because then later on you'll be like, actually that stand-in works totally good because it keeps it muted and it keeps the focus on these other things.
Exactly. And that's the nice thing of just having, identifying these key moments now is, focusing, because we have a very fueled level design department as of right now, I'd like to say so. So keeping my developers on task and keeping them focused on, getting these things that are really, really important kind of pushed out. So, let's say if you taper off later on, I'm not saying it won't necessarily matter, but it won't be as big of, a worry, because that type of work will have already been done.
Right.
So identifying the high priorities, and Sir Balin's a really good advocate of this, of identifying, we really need to focus on this specific thing right now because we don't know if that developer is going to be here a couple months down the road.
Right. Yeah,
and
that's
just being
always
able to identify those things.
That's a weird part of modding too. Is you get certain things. So, example, once in a while, you'll have somebody join the team who has a very specific skill set outside anybody else, and sometimes it's like, all right, well, if that person leaves, we can't have this feature anymore, because you can't just go hire a replacement. It's
oh no,
which is it's a very bizarre part of like I think the two biggest pieces that you see that with modding tends to be UI work and animation. Is that those two are such rare skills that it's like if somebody offers any help in that department, you pretty much need them to deliver the whole thing before you can even commit to locking it in, because it's like, all right, if they bail, like it could take us 6 months to find somebody else who knows how to do this.
Oh, I mean, it can be a catastrophe, and we've had. I think right now I think there's 2 animators. Big shout out to Max G3D. He is our chief. He's our lead animator. And in the past we've had people come on, say they want to do work, but not really want to do work. But I mean, identifying. I mean, it's such a niche in this community to be able to find people that actually not only know how to do that, but know how to do it with the tools that Bethesda wants you to use.
Right. Yeah. We definitely had we had an animator come on briefly. Who did a really cool animation of the player passing out and then standing up again, and the one of his big complaints about it was that the rig that was available was just really cumbersome to use, and so it made the process. So animation is hard already, and it just then making it unenjoyable because of limited tools can really be a turn-off for people. Who basically have their choice of projects. Like when you're in that rare of a skill set, you can basically work on whatever you want, and like people have to kind of let you do that.
They have to adapt to it and implement it in the project. And thank God Max G is very open to trying out ideas that the development team has kind of presented to him. But there's definitely the issue of being able to not only find people that want to do this work, but wanting them to do the work that you need done.
Yeah.
And that was part of the identity of the level design department. Is I kind of put out this advertisement. I was like, I'm looking for people that want to work on the project, are willing to learn, and have an interest in doing something remotely with Miami. And it became the dialogue of getting people motivated and being able to teach them and give them those resources, so we didn't have to worry about all these really experienced people not doing any work because they don't want to do it. So it's definitely interesting to see how unique an animator can become, or how unique a specific team member can be, and it's absolutely nuts. And I mean, that's the downside of modding projects, but it's also interesting to see how that's kind of become a reoccurring theme, because I'm not gonna lie, people animating in 3ds Max, it's not. I don't know if it's industry standard, but I don't know if it's as readily industry standard anymore. So it's hard to find people that want to do that to help benefit their portfolios. If
Right. Well, I think a lot of it has moved over to it's all mocapped and stuff now, and there's probably So it's not quite as much hand animation, although there's still tons of hand animation, and I think they always, even with the mocap, they go back in and tweak it with hand animation to make it look just better, and sometimes
organic,
more organic, or more cinematic, because obviously people have limitations in their movement because they're probably not hiring crazy fitness experts to do all of their motion cap. You would need somebody with the dex, to be able to pull off the animations you want to pull off for certain things. I think with Fallout 4, we've got a pretty stiff animation baseline, so not a lot of it's not real high bar to meet, but there's still a certain expectation of quality there. So
no, unnegotiable. There's definitely that's been part of the palette all along, is not only identifying people that know what they're doing, but being able to get them know what they're doing, like not only know what they're doing, but doing it good. And that narrows down the filter even further of identifying these people in the community. And I think we could probably count on our both our hands the amount of animators that are in the Fallout community right now.
It's very, very small. And in fact, I think we probably, those of us who have worked with animators in the community, probably have a lot of overlap of who we've worked with and everything.
Easy.
And I would also say it's one of those ones. I think there are in my opinion, there are two departments where you really, if you skimp on, then it's very obvious that it's a mod thing. And I think it's animations and sound you can't pass off semi-good work.
God.
Like I think you can, I think with textures, like if it's a middling texture, if it's not the greatest work, then you can usually pass it anyway, unless it's a front and center thing. Like obviously if you had a weapon with a mediocre texture, people would notice. But if your new asset has a somewhat wonky texture, it's not as noticeable and isn't going to be as deal breaking. But a bad animation is like really, really bad. Like just it stands out. So then it makes it a harder barrier to entry for people who are trying to grow and get better at whatever their skill is, because it's going to be harder for you to want to use that in your project, because it's just like there's something off about that. People aren't going to enjoy that.
No, yeah, and then people are gonna ask, it's like, why doesn't this work in third person? And why is my guy's finger not pulling the trigger? It's pulling, the magazine. It's like all those questions start popping up, and it loses its clarity. But I mean, on the subject of sound, I mean, shout out to a lot of these modding projects. We have some outstanding sound producers. I mean, Sergey Ness, I mean, a lot of the guys that have really been popping up, music mixers. There's a few of the other guys. There's even a guy from Miami himself who's doing a lot of guitar riffs. I mean, it's interesting to see where everyone just comes from and starts playing into those key aspects. But I mean, it's definitely there's definitely a big difference between the clarity of something when you don't have those skill sets identified within a project.
Sure.
And it's interesting to see how people cycle back and forth between projects and contributed here and there. But
well, I think those, when you have those rare skill sets, it's easier for you to pick your projects. But it's I think it's also a measure of the quality of mods and expectations in games in general, that you almost have to have a professional squad in order to handle this stuff. So that's almost counter to what we were talking about at the beginning about how anybody can pick up and join in modding. That is the case for a lot of things. I think I think level design's a great one, where you just have to have a general good sense of design. And like you can definitely learn those tools, but then certain other aspects like making fresh 3D models, or doing sound engineering or animation, those definitely are very technical talents. You got to have a lot of back end. I think even programming is one that doesn't require a lot of back experience. I know plenty of people who have learned programming from scripting games, like doing stuff for LUA for The Sims or whatnot, and they picked up everything they know about programming. And I think it's programming. A lot of people are intimidated by it, but it's really it's monkey work at the end of the day. Like it's a very simple complex that you can get deep on, but to pick it up is actually real easy.
Yeah, and there's definitely certain aspects I've come to realize. You can get the basics of things, but there's some very intricate parts of each one of these departments. It's one thing to pick up level design. It's another thing to know how to properly optimize things, to set up palettes and, all these little aspects. And I've been talking back and forth with the lead level designer over at Cascadia, and it is just fun soaking up all this knowledge from him. Just everything that he knows how to do that I've never even heard of before. It just is crazy to wrap my head around. And, it's one thing to pick something up and, be able to do it, remotely, but then for someone else to be like, well, I've kind of been doing this for 18 years. I'm not saying I've met anyone that's been doing level design for 18 years, but it's interesting to see. It's like, here's a shortcut for this, here's a shortcut for that, here's a shortcut for this. And be honest, I just started an internship this summer, and I thought I was a master of Revit, which is our typical CAD software for architectural design. And I get into this firm, and the first day, like, I learned so much more about that software than I had learned in 4 years of school. Because, it's like, well, we've kind of been using this as, professionals on a daily basis for 7 years, and here's everything that you can do it this way, but it's inefficient this way. And it's just, it is absolutely nuts.
Yeah, there's no replacement for real world experience, I think, in most things. I think that you hit the nail on the head there, is that anybody can pick up these skills for a lot of this stuff. But the difference in watching somebody who's mastered it work versus somebody who's just kind of fumbling their way through is pretty substantial. I called programming monkey work, even though that's what I do. I definitely have gotten very, very efficient at it, and I could curve circles around somebody who's just getting started. But I think that those skills like level design and programming. And even art in some sense. So like, obviously I think art you have to have a certain knack for it. Like you've got to have a certain eye to do parts of art. But I think that the actual technical parts of them, those are all great stuff to get started in if people are interested in learning how to mod, is to start in one of those departments. Whereas I think sound engineering and animation are pretty high level skills that require a very specific skill set and ear or eye that I wouldn't recommend fresh new people pop into. I guess if you have that background, then like there are tons of people in the modding community who will gladly teach you the ins and outs of the game side of things. So with your level design team, how many people do you work with personally for doing so you're in charge of the external world space stuff. So that's going to be, now does that include everything in the overworld, like anything that's not an interior cell, or is that basically the landscape, the forests and things like that? Like how do you divide that workspace, that line?
So Right now, I recently picked up a whole bunch of new developers because I had a big motivation for recruitment since we had a few people taper off and few people go dormant. But right now, my biggest focus is, of course, identifying with the exterior world space, getting a lot of the detail works working. It was really weird. I actually recruited 3 people from Russia in 1 week. It was the weirdest occurrence in the world, but one of my guys is really good with beach stuff. Another one focuses heavily on landscaping, and another guy is really focused on getting the blockouts started to chisel away, and then I'm going through and doing detail work. I've been delving into interiors based off of what the programming department needs. Our lead interior designer, he's working on a whole bunch of other projects right now, so his time constraints are a little bit more restrictive right as of being. But my biggest focus is just getting stuff off to the other departments so they can start plugging their information into it, and so we can start processing it and getting it working. And I mean, most recently, I had a big push to get everything done in the Commonwealth. Just get it all finished.
Yeah.
Just to see if we can get all that implemented, and identifying. My primary focus is, of course, exterior level design. But at the end of the day, if we need all these textures implemented, or we need all this implemented, or this stuff, my previous mindsets of working on the implementation team or working with assets, or getting something from a 3D model state into the game itself have helped benefit, help pick up certain parts of the project where it's needed help. I'm not saying I do all those parts of the project, but, there's boring parts that, not a whole lot of people want to do. And if we need it done, I'm willing to set down, the CK for a bit, hop into Photoshop and make sure we can get, a billboard into the game, or get this into the game, or
so you're kind of you're kind of filling a rover role right now of just whatever needs doing to move certain parts. Yeah, that's a good thing to do.
With a primary focus on CK work. I've been trying to commit most time to it because we need a lot of creation kit work done. But if I see an older task on one of the 2D art Trellos, and I'm like, why wasn't this put in game months ago? It's like, well, blah 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 blah. It's like, okay, well, I'm gonna sit down this weekend and get that in the game, so the person that made that can actually see it in its light of day, and that's another thing back to keeping people motivated, keeping people on the same page, communication, and having people's work put under just the right light so that we're going to be really, really proud of it. So making sure, an older task sitting in the, Trello that was done, months ago by a person that might not even be on the team anymore, just making sure it just gets done,
Yeah, that's super important, and it's something we've definitely struggled with. And I think all the big mod teams go through this stuff. And it sounds like from the conversation we've had so far, you've definitely felt this, or maybe not while you've been on the team, but sometimes when when there's a lull in development, whether it be a key player leaves or somebody has to take a step back and things get stuck, is you can end up with things stuck in the queue for a long time, and that's ends up being you need people like you who are willing to just kind of cowboy it and get things back on track and get things unstuck and moving again, and doing things like that. It's a great idea. I know we had a problem with, we had a lot of writing that was done forever ago, and it just never got recorded. Like, they never got handed off to the voice actor. So then it was just like, all right, well, that writer feels like they wasted their time then, because it looks at this point like it's never going to get used. And so like stuff like that can start to happen, where you'll have people drop off just because. And I think this is where we're almost battling history, is that people are so used to seeing projects pop up that are overambitious that never get finished. And so I think anybody who gets involved with somebody else's big project, in the back of their mind, they're always a little afraid of that, of like, all right, what if I just signed on to one of these, dead in the water projects that's never going to make it? Then aren't I just burning time for no reason?
Yeah. No, non-negotiable. And we've had a lot of these projects come and go over time, whether it was, fail of leadership, or things just kind of fell apart. We see these things come and go, and it really is a worry for a developer to want to commit time to something like that. I know I've been talking with Tyler Cooler, and the coolest guy. He's worked on a lot of projects in the past, and he's been able to reuse some of his older work, but there's been stuff that just sits dormant because it was made for location out in Hawaii or something random. It's like, how do we apply these things after they've already been made? And there's always that worrisome mindset in the background. And I know I'd worked on a New Orleans project for a while, and it was getting to the point where it was just me and another guy, good buddy Flakels. We were just doing a lot of the work with a writer guy had disappeared. Our lead level designer had kind of fallen off the face of the earth, and all these people started disappearing. It was going to be the question of should we really keep developing this? Is it worth our time and effort to develop something of this magnitude? And that's always a worry for anyone joining these projects. It's
Well, and I think that it's good to see the progress you're showing off to people. I think it's a good way to keep things moving. I
Oh
also
yeah.
really like the way New Vegas has been doing it, where they have been
Oh
developing all
yes.
their chunks that can be self-contained. Like the weapons are a great example, and they just release them. Or like some of the
Yep.
UI work they've
Yep.
done, they're just like, let's just release this framework. Let's get it out there.
Yep.
I think that's huge because then you're not only then worst case scenario you're providing a lot of cool mods for the community in the meantime.
And that's been a nice thing. Not only working alongside these other projects is slowly starting to identify, opportunities for not necessarily repetition, but where can someone's asset that they spent a lot of time on be used on this project, and this project, and releasing things along the way to where they do see the light of day, regardless of the state of the product or whatever it releases. Someone can go through and play with a gun. Someone can go through and put on a helmet. Someone can go through and add in these cars that expand the world space for some XYZ reason. But those are all little things that are extremely important because it's not only back to the whole milestone debate, but it's just fun little things that people can help identify with, and hey, we're still kicking, we're still moving along, and
Yeah.
we have outstanding developers that are doing work in the background, and we want you guys to see it and play around with it and tell us what you think of it. And regardless if we ever release, you guys got to see what that was all about, and I think that's extremely important. And I think that's a little bit of an issue we see with some of the other projects is there's these mods and things made that are just never see the light of day.
Yeah.
Never see the light of day, and it's extremely unfortunate to see. But I mean, it's better to as these projects taper off and come back, taper off, come back. It's just starting to work more cohesively between projects and identifying. We had all these things made. We're disappearing in a couple months, but you guys can use them.
Yeah. Well, one of the unique things that Fallout 4 offers in that regard is that, and one thing that I would love to see happen if that horrible, like I don't see, here's the thing is that we need to turn the tone because I think we're going too gloom and doom here to anybody listening.
Oh yeah, sorry about that.
They're in no way indicating that this is going to be a project heading in a wrong direction or anything. We're just talking about these big mod projects. I think everybody is aware of how many of them have actually been announced, especially if you follow Nexus at all. You'll see once a month somebody announces some random state or big city that they're planning on doing an overhaul for. And it's very rare that any of them are ever going to get finished. Something at the scale you guys are doing is definitely going to get finished. It's just a matter of how much time does it take and what level of quality do you want to get it to before you're ready to release it. But I think even with these smaller projects or things like you talked about New Orleans, one of the ways that those assets could get used no matter what is with the workshop system. Is that offering those as buildable items for people is just really cool, and it's a great way to get the art in people's hands, and then people in the game who maybe aren't willing to jump into the world space development can then do really cool stuff with them.
Yeah. No, it's interesting to see, when things start popping up here and there, and it's like, well, we're not really developing this anymore, but this project could get a use out of it, and they give a little homage to, this was supposed to be used on this project, and shout out to these guys, but we're going to start using it now, and it's interesting to see, what types of mismatches, and it's always funny seeing things pop up in the asset developers Discord within our internal development. Guys will be like, I developed this a couple months ago for this project. They're not really doing anything anymore, but you guys might be able to use it. Tyler would be like, actually, we could use that. Let's switch it to a pastel color instead and plug it into here, and we can get that up and running in a week. And that's satisfying to see because at first they're like, oh shit, I spent all this time making this, but now they're like, hey, it's going to use somewhere. I'm going to see this in the game. I'm going to be able to play around with it. So that's all I need.
Yeah, absolutely. That's that's a great way to use those resources. And actually, it's something I always find fun to look through the mod resource section on Nexus periodically and see, other things people have done that for. Like occasionally somebody will have had this really ambitious idea for a mod. They started exploring it and they'll just be like, what? Here's all the assets I designed and code in the process. If you guys want to make use for it, you have it, go for it. Which is really fun to see that people do that rather than just letting it die on their hard drives. Because I've definitely been involved in projects and other games where all of us, everybody who created their assets, those assets just, whoever happened to have them on the team, that's
disappear.
And they just disappear. They're just gone into oblivion.
Yep.
Yeah, that's so sad to see.
And they never see the light of day, and that, that's, I don't know if that's their own, thought of process or, the developer never wants that stuff to be presented for some strange reason.
Yeah.
But, it's just always interesting to see where they take something. A good example of that is the whole Mika thing. Although we aren't using that world space anymore, he wanted that to see the light of the day. So, more power to him, because people are getting to explore what he had originally envisioned. He's developing that still, and it's nice to see those things, see the light of day regardless of their state, because people spend time on that stuff, and they want people to know what their thought process was, be able to experience those things regardless of what they've become or what they've been left as.
Yeah. I think Mika's thing is going to end up being ultimately it'll probably be a mix. I think it'll have its ups and downs for you guys as far as a team, but I think in general right now it's going to be positive, because you're just going to get extra spotlights on the project again, which is always good for recruitment.
No, it's
like you're always
there's a lot of benefits with it, and there was a few mystery question marks over some people's heads when it first all started happening, but in the long run it's going to be really beneficial. He's been rather transparent with us in regards to utilizing parts of his world space once things are finished, because he's pretty freaking good at what he does. Yeah. So it's nice that he's still willing to work with the product, even though he's decided to kind of only take his own path with it.
Right. Yeah, it'll be really cool to do a kind of side by side comparison one day once you guys release. That'll be fun to see, because not only will it be you'll see the difference in visions, but it'll also be that it'll be, like say it's in 2 or 3 years or something, then it'll be 3 years of polish by Mika and 3 years of polish by the full squad, and see like what you guys do in that amount of time. That's all, you can do some serious damage in that amount of time.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Well, that's been another interesting thing, hopping on in the leadership position that I've been given, and seeing these projects come and go in the past, and seeing oscillation of developers. It's just so fascinating to pick apart different mindsets. I mean, going through the world space of Mika's old ESM and just seeing what his thought process was, recognizing a building from in real life and be like, that's how he did that. And, then going through Star Cornet's world space and seeing just how much of a mastermind he is when he's going through and designing these things. I mean, it is crazy to be able to pick apart and dissect things and figure out what thought processes were, and being able to refine yourself more as a developer.
Sure.
And it's there's certain detriments to incorporating different aspects of different products, but it's also really, really fun to see, all these different developers, regardless if they're with the product or not anymore, their stuff still gets to see the light of day. And that's all you need.
Yeah, definitely. That's huge for motivation and everything. And it's just fun to see in the community. One of the things I love seeing about in these modding communities is that over time, as people discover more and more things and start sharing their secrets, is that you just get a more and more refined experience every year. Is that like you get, and you start to also the vision that the community wants starts to emerge. So you start to see, the types of mods that nobody cares about, the types of mods people are passionate about, and then people kind of build on those things and build on the popular things. For example, like Bethesda had no idea that workshops were going to be so popular, and they've admitted many times they almost cut the whole feature, and now it's probably it's arguably the most popular part of Fallout 4.
Oh yeah, I mean it's outstanding. I've found myself multiple times going back in and redesigning my variation of the I always forget the intro town. What
Sanctuary?
Sanctuary Hills.
Yeah.
Sanctuary Hills.
Yeah, you're lost in Miami now. You can't remember the Commonwealth.
No, I have not picked up an actual video game besides QA testing for Fallout in 6 months.
Oh, welcome to the club, buddy. That's that's the modder's curse. Is you become a casual gamer for a while until you take a break. Which is it's fun, and it's also scary, because like I personally always worry I'm going to get disconnected to what people like to game, or like what makes a game fun anymore. All I do is test. But one of the things that I forced myself to start playing the game every week again, just to make sure that doesn't happen.
Sure.
And I ended up doing it as a YouTube series, and just to let other people join me along for the ride and see what I'm experiencing. And one of the interesting things that I'm finding myself doing is when I see something Bethesda has done that I'm not quite sure how they did it, I'm finding myself taking notes and then going back into the creation kit and pulling it apart, which is fun.
Oh my God.
It's a fun way to learn.
No,
it's
I agree.
Oh, that's how they did that. I'm going to start using that trick.
Yes, and that's been half the fun of going through the old work of Miami. And I hate to bring up Miami again, but I mean, just going through Mika's stuff and just look
Miami, man.
well, just looking through his world space and be like, how the hell did he make that damn window? It's like, well, in reality, it's a whole building hidden underneath the world space. It's like, Jesus Christ! But it's fun to see just thought process on things, and being able to pull things apart. And that was my big motivation with 76. Unfortunately, is it was fun to watch my buddy walk around, screaming through the mic, and we were, clipping through the world space every once in a while. But it was also really cool to sit there and take notes and be like, hey, how'd they make this water slide? Oh, they actually used this generic asset from Fallout 4, and this is what they did here, and this is what they did there. And I've come to realize this with architecture, and I'm starting to realize it with level design. I will never look at a video game the same way I did before this whole experience, because I'll be sitting there trying to figure out how they made X, Y, and Z things.
Yeah, there is. I think the other part of that comes is once it's a lot easier after you've started developing your own stuff to recognize when you've hit a system versus something that's organic.
Oh my god!
So then, like, certain gameplay feels like a slot machine instead of a gameplay element. Like, it's like, ugh,
yes,
and it's like cringy and it's hard to engage with. Like, that's why I can't play MMOs anymore. Is once I realized, like, if I got way hooked into World of Warcraft, and then once I broke free of that spell and started developing. I mean, I had been developing mods before then, but when I really got into it, it was sometime after that. And then trying to go back to an MMO and realizing how much of it is just repetitive loops designed to make you push buttons. It was like, oh, it's disgusting. I can't do it.
It's really, really screwed up. And it's the same thing with me looking at modular kits and level design. When I was showing this to one of the developers the other day, because we were trying to figure out a certain part of the world space. And I was like, take a look at this Google image and recreate that with all the kits, basically. And we started to identify, like, seams, basically, of where these kits would go together. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, I need to go to bed. And it's the same thing with architecture. I will never look at a building the same. I'll always look for, a crack in, the concrete here, why they decided to put a door there. And me and my buddies, we had the funnest time in the world. We took a concretes class once, and I will never look at a piece of brick the same because of that damn class. But it's just an entirely different mindset, and spending a lot more time focusing on, how do we recreate this? How do we do this? What makes it the way that it is, rather than just taking it for face value? And that's part of the fun of game dev. And I'm sure you've come to realize this as you've gone through and done your own, extrapolation of things and reinventing, how you want to program X, Y, and Z things, and, create this to do that. It's fun being able to tear things apart, but you will never look at something the same because of it.
Yeah, it does. Well, one of the things I've recognized now is that the thing that I loved in games, I actually get that same satisfaction out of game development. Of like for me, my favorite games were always it was the exploration, it was the discovering things as you go, and it's like that's exactly what I get in game development all the time. So,
yep.
Yeah, it ends up being like I don't even need to game anymore. Kind of now that I've gotten so hardcore into developing for them.
Yeah, I'm the same way. My buddies will be like, "Hey, you want to hop on World of Tanks after this?" It's like, yeah, it's really cool, but I got to implement these textures for this thing. They're like, that sounds super freaking boring. It's like, I'll be honest, it's kind of weird, but I really enjoy doing this. I don't know. It's the satisfaction of being able to look at something from beginning to end. See, I mean, it's just like a school project for me. Starting in the development phase.
And,
starting with the
a lot of people are probably like, what?
You
like scroll projects? What the hell's wrong with you?
Oh, dude, my buddies gave me so much shit for it back in school. They're like, come out, go to the party or whatever. And it's like, hey, I actually kind of want to work on, this project because it's got a deadline. We got to make sure it gets done properly. And I mean, this thing interests me. So I'm not saying I stay inside every damn weekend, but I mean, there's certain aspects of just going through this process, going through projects, just looking at things from beginning to end, being able to pull things apart and figure out how things work rather than just taking them at face value it's a whole new mindset, and I've loved absolutely every bit of it. Yeah, even though there's boring parts of it, but
sure. But I think like you said, I think the boring parts, once you I think like for anybody who's starting out at modding, I think you definitely want to start with the more exciting stuff. And then once you start setting your sights on bigger things, then you'll be more willing to take on the crappier work yourself, because you're just like, what? Sure. Like, I want to get that. Like, I tasted the glory of getting this smaller thing done. That was really, fun for me. And it's like, now I want to do this more impressive thing and get it out to people. Well, I'm going to have to do all this crappier work. In the meantime, you'll be more inspired to do so.
Yep. No, I entirely agree. And it was the same thing when I made my pool fence in 2 months. I was so happy. I was like, I finally got this damn thing in game. And nowadays, I've been talking with Tyler, the lead 3D asset artist. He's like, dude, this pool fence is absolutely fucked. And I was like, yeah, I know. It is pretty bad. But, we've strayed away from that. We figured out better ways to do things. But it's just, it's fun to see how people have developed and changed. And it's been a fun ride. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah. Well, that pool fence, I think, is an example of, like, that's how you actually learn things. You have to screw up and fail. Like, that's how you that's how you learn to get better at stuff. Like, you probably learned more in that 2 months than, again, going back to your college thing than you did in most of your college learning phase.
Yes.
Just because you're self motivated, you're just trying things over and over again, and each time you fail, you know that that's not a thing you should do anymore.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Speaking of, trying and failing and the whole development process of this is, we were talking about not playing video games anymore, but I just feel like there's much more satisfaction with being able to complete something in this development process than, completing a milestone in a video game. You play it, you finish it, and, it's like whatever. But if you're like, hey, I found out how to implement this damn texture that can be used 1,000 times over this spot, it's like, that's really freaking cool.
Yeah.
It has more like replayability, and you'll see more, yield for it. Whether or not 5 people play the mod or 100 people play the mod, it's interesting just to see people get enjoyment out of things that they might not find important, but you spend a lot of time on, and it's part of their experience. And that's what made me enjoy it a lot more. It's not so much just taking things at face value. It's implementing it and getting it to the people to where they take it at face value, but what really went into making that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that magnifying your effort. Like you could spend all this time, getting your character level to level 100, and like that feels like a little accomplishment. But if you instead take your skill at texture design to level 100, in a sense, air quotes there, then you have that skill in real life forever and can continue to use it. And then everything you create with that skill, you release to the community, and now those people get to keep using it as long as they're playing the game. So yeah, your effort just seems naturally magnified. So it seems like a better use of time overall.
No, I entirely agree. And this was the fascinating thing with me picking up 3ds Max is we were doing a senior level architecture project. I wanted to entirely visually script my building. So I used this like Grasshopper plugin thing for this 3D modeling software. And I was super, super duper interested in this, yada, yada, yada. In the background, I was doing this, development thing. And I was starting to realizing a lot of these programs made much more efficient ways of me doing things in my actual field. And that's when I realized it clicked with me. I was like, I have a hobby that actually helps refine me more as a professional. When I told my parents that, they're like, oh my God, that's really, really cool that you're, in the past it was like video games were a waste of time, but in reality, this is a productive waste of time, I call it. But, it's like, I wouldn't, call it a waste of time, but you get what I'm saying. It's interesting to see how we've gained enjoyment out of doing things productively,
right,
rather than just taking things, like I said, at face value.
Well, I mean, it's I've looked at modding in a lot of ways as it's a safe place to fail. So it's
Exactly.
kind of like play for kids. Like kids need to like get hurt on the playground and stuff, so they learn how to be more physical and dexterous. And with this stuff, we're learning how to do better in software. We're learning how to, if you make a bunch of mistakes in your level design at this phase, it's not going to be a problem because, like, at worst, people report some bugs and you go back and fix them. Now, if you were working for a big company, like if your goal is to be, I want to be a level designer for Bethesda or some, other company that you like, then if you go make a mistake like that and it gets into release and then it costs them a lot of money, you could lose your job over it. So
yeah,
doing it at this phase is a great spot to experiment and fail at. This is a great spot to do it. Like that's one of the things that any of those mod projects we've been talking about in other games past or that have already come and failed in Fallout 4, that it was phenomenal life and learning experience for the people involved.
Oh yeah, unnegotiable. And we've seen a lot of people from our community go into the actual game dev industry.
Yeah,
and this is another interesting thing we were talking about on Miami the other day is. There's been people that have left our project that have done really outstanding work in the progress, and they've come back and checked in with us, be like, hey, I just had an interview with, X, Y, and Z game dev. We've had some people interview with Bethesda, for Pete's sake, and use Miami in their portfolio. Yeah. It's so interesting to see where this, where projects like this take people, regardless if they come or go or fail, or, if I find myself, not picking up the CK after we finish this project again, it helped refine myself more as a professional, understand, designing world spaces and 3D built environment. And I mean, it has just opened up so many new horizons to me in my field personally. Do I ever see myself working as a level designer for Bethesda? Maybe. I don't know in this current state.
Sure.
But it's helped me refine myself much more, figuring out what I enjoy in architecture. And that's the most fascinating thing for me is these hobbies are not necessarily just so much, just things we kind of do on the weekends. It's things we genuinely enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And then you figure out, hey, this thing I really enjoy doing, I can get paid money for this. Wait a second. So then that's when things really start getting super duper interesting. And I'm just interested to see where Master Studies takes me, and this whole Fallout Miami project, and just developing things just in general. It's just It's mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing.
Well, I think I've heard this a lot from people who do martial arts at a high level, is that sometimes just mastering anything in particular ends up giving you new ways to look at other things. So just gaining mastery in any field, even no matter how silly it may seem. So even something like modding, you will incidentally gain extra benefits in other parts of your life because it changes the way you look at things. Just because you're like, I understand something so fully, and I can now, and I have new, I can think outside the box on this thing. Now I can, that some of those thought processes, you can then take them and apply them to other parts of your life. So you can gain, just by gaining mastery in something like the creation kit, you suddenly have just a lot of deep understanding of how parts of a computer program work. And a lot of that, and especially in today's day and age, like where well, not all jobs, but most jobs involve some sort of computer or computerized equipment, that you're going to have extra beneficial knowledge in that regard. Like you just have a deeper understanding how certain things flow together.
Unnegotiable. And I mean, with me on my journey through this, I have learned how to implement textures, which in my school, was like the most fascinating thing in the world, because everyone's like, I was going to do this material in this building, but I couldn't figure out how to get it in the rendering software. It's like, well, come talk to me there, Sonny, because I know how to do that. And it was the same thing with, why is my model moving so slow? It's like, well, you need to optimize it. And now I know how to do that. And it's all these little things along the way I've been able to pick up and understand and, pull apart of understanding this whole new dynamic to 3D world spaces, rather than just building things to, make it look really pretty. With architecture, we have a big focus on, precision, making things look super clean, cut, and fine. But what I've come to realize with, the creation kit, my development process is, you just need to kind of make things look good to the point where people are kind of deceived by them, as right. Screwed up as that may sound. But I had an architecture professor say something really interesting to me once. He says, develop something up to the point to where you can start cheating and getting away with it. And the respect of this is, with every building people make, and with everything people design, scripting, is they don't know the process that went behind that. They're taking it for what it is. And it's the same thing with architecture. In my experience, is I don't have to spend 1,000 hours developing every individual bolt on the building. I just have to develop the 15 bolts that you're going to see in that picture.
Right.
So it's all those little things I've just taken along the way of how to make things optimized, how to make things, I wouldn't say deceptive, but how to make things appealing to the people that need to see it, and what needs to be seen, and what you need to focus on, rather than just over spending way too much time on one specific thing. And that's been part of the process of me just discovering optimization in the CK, how to make things really, really cool. And
you're hitting on something I've mentioned, talked with other people. It's real artistship. If you go too far down the rabbit hole, you're wasting a lot of effort that the vast majority of people will never notice, and then you risk burning out and never finishing anyway. And then what did you do? So. That's interesting. I think another point in that along that same line we were talking is that you pick up these different skills and stuff, and you learn to ask the right questions. So like even if you can't take these skills directly and transfer them, at least you understand some of the underlying concepts. So then you can ask the right questions to people maybe that know more than you about that thing, and then that can open up some new doors. And I think that that really helps for people, and like anybody who's trying to learn how to mod. I think what you end up finding is people tend to come in, they'll have these big grand ideas, and they'll be like, how do I do this? And it's like, you're asking the wrong question. And I think by just doing things, you learn to like kind of pare it down what you're trying to do and get down to the core of it, so that you can ask people the actual question, like the thing you need, the actual piece you need to know to move forward on whatever you're working on.
And I'd say, I don't know if you agree with me on this, I say the best type of modder is one that's willing to learn.
Oh, absolutely.
One that's willing to pick up the tools and ask those types of questions along the way. Not so much just, well, I want to get this done, tell me exactly what I need to do, and we'll just call it that. How do I do that? What exactly are you telling me? How do I figure it out, how to reapply this and be able to do it myself one day? And those are the types of people that we look for on Miami. Those are the type of people I'm sure you look for on your modding projects and all of the other modding projects, is looking for people not so much that are really good at what they do, but for people that want to learn and expand themselves more as developers.
Yeah. Well, I think there's two types of people there, or maybe it's not necessarily two types of people, but there's two ways you can approach it. I think either I'm in the former camp, which I would describe as somebody who's so stubborn that they won't give up on an idea until they make it happen.
Sure.
So like I will just bash my head.
I'm the
same
way.
I think another way to approach it is come in with a less expectation of what you're trying to accomplish and just experiment, and some things will emerge for you to do that are really cool. So like I think a lot of mods exist just because somebody was just playing around to see what was possible, and like it was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Let me expand on that idea. And I think that's a great way, especially in an open world game like this where it's all built on systems, is just playing around, tweak with numbers, and change out models and just change things and see what happens, see what the result is, and you could probably find some really cool mods. But I think I think that's a great way to start learning too, is to just start pushing buttons and levers and
screwing around with it. Yeah.
And you might learn some
screwing around with it, see where it takes you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good fun way to learn things. But I think you can also learn if you're willing to just never give up, never surrender, and just go at it like that.
Yeah, and commit to something. Don't sell someone something that's I can smell if your shit stinks. It's like don't ever try and tell someone it's like, oh, I want to help with a project, but then not actually help with it.
Oh yeah, and that's a pretty common thing, which is I don't know. I don't think that's limited to modding though. I think that's just in general volunteer projects. I think that's actually just everything for the most part. Right. It's I think people get excited in the moment, and it's like, yeah, that sounds really cool, and they're riding on that inspiration, but haven't thought through to the actual work that comes after that. Because I always compare it to like the infatuation stage of a new relationship. Like you're so excited, and you're basically riding on chemicals and like all the new high that comes with that. And if you don't have a good foundation in there, like if you haven't really put thought into it and you haven't looked for the things to make sure that this is something sustainable, that once you get out of that honeymoon phase, like you're gonna just crash and burn.
Yep. I mean that's with literally any project, any approach to anything, is realizing the amount of workflow that comes with things. Don't let that detriment you and seize all forms of optimism. But at the same time, you have to realize that there's a lot of work that goes into these types of things, regardless if you're starting a volunteer organization, motivating a group of individuals, getting work done on things, getting tedious work, fun work. This is just basic life lessons right here.
But, oh, yeah, absolutely.
These are all things that I call them basic, but at the same time, it takes a long time to identify these types of things. And especially every different project and every different, as you said, relationship, every different form of, work that we do has different obstacles and things that we have to understand and overcome. And I think the biggest things that I've learned in my experience is learning how to run groups of not necessarily run groups of individuals, but being able to adapt situations to where everyone feels tailored to and can be and work together in a cohesive relationship on things. But I'm still trying to figure out how to refine my own skill set to not focus so much on nitty gritty stuff and focus on what people want to see and getting work out to people that people want to do things. And it's just interesting to see how all these different mindsets come together, not just in modding, but just in all these projects and in life in general, and being able to adapt how you interpret situations to, what's the best approach to something. And the best person is one that's willing to learn. As another one of my professors said, your best project will always be your next one.
Sure.
And that's half the fun of all this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think I know it all does sound like we're talking about life lessons and philosophy and stuff, but it's kind of just like when you start digging deep into anything, I think it starts to sound like that. And I find it fascinating because I from a lot of this podcast for me started from the fact that I have been modding so long in my life, and like looking back at how I used to view it, like mentally, and like where I am now compared to then is so different. And it's like, what if I had heard somebody I believed tell me these things at that time? Because there's always this, like I started modding when I was a teenager, and something I think we all recognize about ourselves as teenagers is we were kind of resistant to people telling us what to do.
Unnegotiable.
And a lot of it turns out like all that stuff's like, oh, they were right. And it's like, so some of this stuff is almost like I'm kind of talking back to my old self and being like, hey, man, you would have been a lot further along if you had listened to people who told you about this thing. So I think the best way is rather than tell. I've found that when I learn things, it's not because somebody's telling me to do something. It's because somebody described their own experience or their own positive experience, and I could relate to it. And then I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. So I love having these conversations. I hope no one out there listening thinks of it as condescending. It's literally just kind of exploring thought process with somebody else who's gone through it. Like, you've gone through this the same as I have, in the sense of like learning how to mod and learning, what makes it tick and what makes it work for you mentally. Like, it's just fascinating to me to talk about this.
And what that journey is. I mean, everyone's had a different journey. Everyone's had a different background. You can talk to almost any one of these developers on any project, and everyone comes from, it seems like a different part of the world, a different, dynamic, a different mindset. Someone could start out, absolutely hating the concept of music, but then be, a lead developer on, a sound design team. It's just so fascinating to see how people adapt, change, and overcome. And these certain totems you take through with life, even through these projects, help identify those types of things along the way. It's interesting. I never thought I'd find myself doing level design, especially in a leadership position. A year ago, I joined the Miami project offering, maybe I could learn a few asset skills and take those into school with me. But now it's become so much more. I've gotten to meet a lot of really cool people and had a lot of really cool conversations and developed a lot of really good relationships with people. While at the same time, being able to discover, this level design shit's pretty freaking awesome. And it's been just so fascinating. I mean, it's been a real pleasure talking to you as well, because it's another thing is sitting inside voice chat and talking to my developers and talking to other people on the team. It is just so interesting to hear other people's perspectives on things.
Absolutely. That was the other pieces of why I started this podcast were that one, I wanted to, like I said, wanted to talk back to myself, but also to give other people the chance to hear this of like, hey, we're just regular people that just got passionate about games. So we just let ourselves get obsessed. You can too. Like, all you guys out there who, come up with these crazy mod ideas and you throw them out to developers, like we were all you as well at one point. And like, I just want to show that to people, is that just go start doing it. Like, you'll figure it out eventually.
Exactly.
And once you get to a tipping point where you've accomplished enough, you'll inspire others to join you. But on the other side of that is, I don't get to talk like this about this stuff in real life. Like, it's only,
oh God, no,
because nobody, no, like, there's so few people. Like, the modding, like, especially if we talk just Bethesda modding. So like, or even if we just talk about open world games that get modded, there are so few people that actually do it at the obsessive level that those of us involved in these big mods do it at. So this is like, getting to talk like with you is a nice treat, because it's not common. You know what I mean? Like, how many people, like,
oh, it's not common at all. No. And that was a funny, common within certain aspects. It was funny because I put a Fallout Miami desktop on my background at work, and my boss leans over, he goes, Fallout Miami, that I've heard of that before. I was like, wait, what? So it was cool opening up that dialogue, and he goes, yeah, no, I saw the trailer for that. It looked really cool. I was like, yeah, well, I'm actually on that development team right now. He's like, oh, and him and I have been talking back and forth about it, but it's a really rare treat to be able to just sit down and talk with someone about this, and being able to relay, what I'm doing, on this computer every night or every day is not necessarily so much me just sitting down there playing video games. It's me talking with other, future professionals, talking to people about, how we can solve solutions and make outstanding experiences for people. I mean, within theory, we're making movies for people, and that's an emotional journey all within itself.
Yeah.
And it's just, it is so fascinating to see not only where video games have come, but where everyone just derives from, and how the industry has changed so drastically from just being a lot of programming to being, designers, music developers, programmers, asset developers, artists, for Pete's sake. I mean, it's become so much more, and it's been a pleasure being a part of that journey along the way, because I never realized any of this a year ago, and then a year down the road, here I am.
Yeah.
We're having this conversation. I mean, it's just absolutely nuts.
I mean, adding to your point, it's gotten so far. One of the people we're going to be recruiting either later this year or next year is a cinematographer. Like, that's how artistic it has become.
It is. it is so fascinating. And I mean, seeing all the different roles in a Discord, 2D asset developer, or, sound lead, everyone just comes from different dynamics. And some people, another interesting thing, I don't know if this is a commonality, some people will have hobbies that don't correlate to their profession whatsoever. So someone could be, a sound developer on a modding project, but in reality, work on a construction site. And,
right.
It's interesting to see, a double-sided sword, as you had said in the past. It's almost like night and day with some people sometimes too. And it's interesting opening up the dialogue, again, finding out where people come from. But, what motivates them to work on a hobby versus do a profession, and it's
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, well, there's always that fact that it can be a little soul crushing to do your hobby for a corporation sometimes.
Yeah.
Like I was turned off from, so I actually, before I got into programming, I kind of learned programming pretty early in my life, and then but I didn't really love it until way later in life. But I was really obsessed with, I wanted to be an animator and artist, and then when I found out the kinds of jobs you have to do in the gaming industry, it was like, nope, I'm not going to do that, because you basically have to do bitch work for many years. Before you get to do the cool stuff. But like modding lets people kind of shortcut that. Like you get to just go right to whatever you want to do, which is kind of cool.
And it's the same thing with my level design experience. Is architecture is really fun. I love architecture. I've loved going to school for it and everything. But there's the bounds of reality that start scaring people away. I have to learn, what makes a 2x4 a 2x4, and how this wall is made in reality. But in a game world, you don't have to worry about that at all. You have an unlimited palette. You can make these diverse worlds. You can explore these worlds. You can demolish things that were never meant to be demolished. You can recreate things that you never thought would even see the light of day. And the bounds are just kind of stripped away. And that's what's been a new introduction for me into this whole new world of game design that I would have never thought of, because it's always, video games are a waste of time. You always hear that from, baby boomers, parents or things like that. They'll tell you it's like video games are a waste of time. But there's this whole professional side of it that you come to realize is really, really cool. People are making money doing this, and they're enjoying what they're doing. And it's, who knows, maybe in another life I could see myself being, a lead level designer over at some big game dev industry. Who knows where the road will take me over the next couple of years. But
sure,
it's just so fascinating to see what this industry has just become.
Yeah. Well, and you also don't know where life will take you in the future, too. It might be that you pursue architecture for a while, and then 10 years down the line, it becomes relevant that you happen to have level design experience in some position that opens up. Especially because, everything's converging into computer space, and, who knows? Maybe it'll just take you there. And it'll be like, yeah, I happen to know how to do that.
With architecture, that was another interesting dynamic. Is architects have become more readily introduced with the game dev industry over the past decade because of how virtual reality started playing into things, how you can relay information to clients, how you can get that information to people to where they can basically walk through a building before it's built. I mean, that's video games in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating because 15 years ago, people were still drawing black and white lines on a piece of paper. And, I'm not saying we don't do that anymore in the architecture industry, but it's become a bigger focus on relaying information to clients and getting information to people to where they can interpret it as, something more visual and more of an experience rather than just seeing it and taking it for, what it is. And that's been the benefit of working with these projects, is understanding how to relay visualization to people and how to get information to someone that doesn't necessarily understand how something works. They don't care how something works, but they want to see what it becomes. And that's been part of the fun. I don't know if I'm ever delving on Unreal Engine or anything like that. Those are all part of the visualization toolkit that have really started to become integral to my profession. And it slowly started popping up with other professions as well, of how video games and how, recreating visual environments and recreating these fantasy worlds has become, key to sound design, key to developing new game engines and developing, diverse artistic palettes, in both the 3D world but on a two-planar world as well. It's become such a more diverse community than it was, 2 decades ago.
Yeah.
2 decades ago, I wasn't necessarily alive 2 decades ago, but it was something a lot more basic, and it was becoming nurtured as something great, but it's become such a big part of everyone's reality at this point. And I've said this probably 14 times in the past hour. It's way over my head. It's way over my head.
Well, it sounds like you have got a good handle on things, though, because I think like your focus on basically getting obstruction out of the way, looking at things at the big picture, and making sure that your people that are coming on are excited. I think those are all great qualities to be somebody in a leadership position. That to me is what to look for when you're trying to decide, if you want to see if a team's going to succeed or not, is like, do their leaders have their heads in the right place? And everybody I've talked to from Miami, it really seems to be the case. It seems like you guys have a really strong leadership team. You guys are really you have a good focus on on the end goal. One of the things like Constantine talked about was that you guys have really kept yourselves in check from going out of scope, like so you know exactly your journey, what it's going to entail, so that you can keep things realistic. It's real exciting to hear because I think we were all hoping that 76 was going to be the New Vegas to Fallout 4, but
Sure.
since it can't be or it isn't, hopefully mods like Miami and Cascadia can be, and it really sounds like it's you're heading in that direction.
I hope to see it takes us that way, and back to our whole detriment earlier, we'll see where the next couple of years takes us. I'm a very optimistic person. We have a really good development team running right now, a lot of outstanding mindsets, a lot of outstanding people from different parts of different, backgrounds. It the sky is the limit at this point. Without sounding too overly optimistic, I think we have a really solid, head on our shoulders to be able to do something really great. And the nice thing is I've been trying to do this more readily in my leadership position is open up dialogue as Fallout 4, I'm not saying it's becoming out of the spotlight, but as newer games start popping up, how does our community as a whole start changing? How does, if things start becoming less apparent, developers start moving into studio environments and people start disappearing, how do we become more cohesive as a community?
Right.
And how do we start getting these products out regardless of how many people are left still developing them?
Right.
And ensuring that those things see the light of day. And it's interesting opening up that dialogue because it's starting to become more readily applicable. I'm not saying that projects are shutting down, but it's been, I don't know if you guys have had the issue with this. It's been getting a lot harder to find developers to do certain things.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, has that been an issue?
You definitely don't see. For example, it used to be if we put out a recruitment post, you'd get dozens of replies within hours. Now it can be within a couple of weeks you might see a handful. So there's just way less people looking at the project anymore that aren't already involved in the community. So I think you get a lot less outside exposure than you would have early on in the life of the game. So that's definitely a thing. And I think part of that is something I talk about a lot is the fact that we're in this weird space where there are so many games coming out and there are so many games at really high quality for free or damn near free that it's not like the olden days where you could play like when I was growing up playing games, you could play every single game that came out. It was totally feasible to do that. And then so when mods came out, they were a new experience. Well, now it's to the point where it's literally not possible for you to play a 100th of the games that come out every year. So then we're basically now competing with AAA studios for attention. And it's definitely a weird space to be in, but we're fortunate with Bethesda community, or in the Bethesda community, is it has a very, very strong player base. I mean, this is why like ESO and Fallout 76 exist, is because Bethesda recognized that. They were looking at their Steam numbers and being like, holy crap, we have literally hundreds of thousands of people playing our games that are 10 years old still. Like, this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
We need to get a more perpetual role in this, and that's kind of why they created the online games, because obviously those are perfect for that. So it's this weird space where we're perpetually we're competing with the big AAA titles, but we're in a great space in the sense that the player base for these games is very persistent, it's very sticky, so those people should be there for a long time. But that's what I was talking about earlier that I think is really cool, is I think that later in the life of these games, so like if you go look at Skyrim's modding community is a great example, is that they have a good handful of frameworks that are so ubiquitous, you expect everybody to have them, that there's a lot more use of those. So then, you get a lot more standardized experience, you get a cleaner experience out of your mods, like just a better overall thing. And I think that will happen with Fallout 4 as well. I think you'll start to see that things will get more standardized. The things that people don't like and don't want to see in mods, people aren't going to be developing, and the things that people really like, that you'll see more focus on those. And I think those same principles and things will happen with mods like Miami. Like you guys you have plenty of time now because you're playing the long game to see what are the popular mods, what are the things people are really interested in. Make sure you steer the experience toward that.
I know I don't know if you've noticed this as well. I have noticed the community slowly starts steering a little bit closer to expansion upon the dynamic of Fallout, just in general. Not so much a focus on how many camo mods can I add to my gun, but what is this new building that appeared on this block in this part of the world space? Or, if I go to the memory den, I can travel back to this little location and see this happen. And, quest mods and things like that have really started to become. It seems like the taste palette for mods has not been so much the fascination with how you can, identify your specific player, look to be, Camo Buster 9000, you got a super decked out backpack and all those types of things. It's a bigger focus on what that emotional journey is with your character, and, a bigger focus on, my character is a engineer and he focuses on developing, and you see that with your settlement mod is a big focus on being able to systemize that and being able to create these little dynamic world spaces in a very, mechanical fashion. And it's the same thing with these big quest mods, is being able to expand upon, what is Fallout.
Yeah.
Well, where does the player go after this?
I think there hasn't been enough of that stuff, so people are hungry for it. I think we've had an excessive amount of like outfit and weapon mods come out, which are really cool. I think you can customize your character.
Oh yeah, not denying that. Yeah,
and I don't think that'll ever be satiated either. I think people can release those and expect hot files forever, because I think people are always looking for new ways to make their characters stand out and feel unique, so that can be part of their playthrough or whatever. But I think there hasn't been enough quality quest content out there, and I think we all have that experience. Like every time I go back and play an older Bethesda game, so every time I load up Skyrim, in particular Skyrim, that's the one I tend to go back to most, is I go back and look for all of the popular new quest mods, because I just want to be able to immerse in that character for as long as possible. And I don't think we've had a ton of that in Fallout 4. So I don't think that there's a dearth of it. I think there's just a hunger for it right now. So I think, stuff like,
I agree.
And it's like, I think Miami is going to, I know it made it immediately to Hot Files, just that early version that got released. And I think that's going to make people even more hungry for your guys' quest side of things, of just being able to be like, all right, I want to explore this with my character and actually have other NPCs to interact with and like actual quests to complete in here, so I can really dive in and live out my character. Like, what is my character's experience that I create? Because I think even people who don't hardcore RP, I think they still come up with a general idea for their character, even if it's just a build. If it's just like I'm gonna go all stealth, or I'm gonna go all melee. You tend to like you do quests in a certain way, you do your combat in a certain way, and you, even if you're not RPing in the sense of like, imagining what your character's saying or anything, you still make decisions on your gameplay. Like if you decide I'm going to be a melee character, even if you get some insane like over the top legendary sniper rifle, you're not going to just suddenly switch yourself over to a stealth player.
No.
And so I think you kind of form like a little RP thing, and so having more world to explore and see how that character reacts to that environment is so exciting and fun.
It's also really, really cool. Another benefit of these modding projects, which we didn't really touch on earlier, is with us developing ourselves internally and alongside these other projects, is we can share those world spaces and ideas with one another to help expand the world even more.
Yeah.
So, you start seeing, there was a big move. I don't know if it's still happening, but it was a big movement to have partner projects that could share lore with each other.
Okay.
So you can reference XYZ person over in this location, which is in another big mod project. But, at the same time, it's part of your dynamic world space. So everything has a lot of moving parts, but all those moving parts are working together. I'm not saying someone over in Seattle is going to be mentioned inside Miami, but at the same time, there's stuff going on over there. It might briefly be mentioned by someone that's come from over that way, but it's just interesting to be able to introduce that and being able to work alongside people and bounce ideas. And it's like, well, you guys made this asset. Can we use that asset? And, back to that whole topic. But
yeah,
it's nice to be able to have access to that toolkit, not so much restrictive to this is what Bethesda declares. Well, Bethesda hasn't really refined these parts of the world space. And we have a really, really dynamic writer team that's researched into the lore and found those gaps that haven't been filled and been plugging and playing and seeing what we can do with the world space that plays along with the overall dynamic of Fallout, because we have a really nice community, but we also have a very smart community that knows the lore very, very specifically.
Right.
So we have to make sure every T is crossed and every I is dotted, because the second you have a small inconsistency, you'll be like, why is there a Brother to Steel helmet in this very obscure location? The Brother to Steel shouldn't be here, blah, 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 because it's this time period. And
Well,
You know,
and
that's the whole
I
player.
think people look at mods a little under a little harsher light for that stuff too, because it's like you're already like just by being a mod, you're threatening their immersion in the sense that it's like
Oh, sure.
this is not canon, and I know it's not, but I want you to fool me to believe that it is. So I think it's I think Bethesda went through it at first. I think they go through it a lot less now. I think a lot of people were there are definitely the hardcore fans who give Bethesda a lot of crap for all the things they've changed in the lore, but I think a lot of us who have like bought in all the way with the new Fallouts are we give them a pass, and we're now just accepting it as their stuff is now the canon, and that it is what it is. But I think still there's when people go into a mod, you're almost, especially quest mods, I think people are looking for, because there are a lot of, throughout Bethesda game history, there are a lot of really poorly done quest mods out there. Usually they'll have very terrible voice acting, or just general wonkiness to them that just feels like a broken experience, and it takes you out of it.
Yeah.
And so I think then people go into quest mods with kind of a finer tooth comb than they might go into looking at Bethesda stuff specifically.
Because, you know, I mean, another thing with these bigger modding projects and with how big these teams have started developing is I think it may have started a little bit more with the Capital Wasteland project. I'm trying to wrap my head around some of the older modding projects in the community, the big projects, as we like to call them, is they identified with, you know, we're going to use voice actors, we're going to use all these different aspects of it, and that must have just clicked in people's heads. That kind of set the dynamic for what we should be seeing in these types of quest mods. I haven't done a whole lot of modding, you know, download a whole bunch of mods off the Nexus, because, you know, I really started delving into the whole modding scene, you know, a year ago, and started focusing on developing stuff more or less. But it's interesting to see how people have really started to identify with this, you know, approach of this is what it has to be, because they set this precedent, you know, XYZ time ago, and if it's not that way, then it's kind of a shit mod, or, you know, it's not up to my standard.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting because everyone's kind of developed their, you know, approach to how they want to refine their projects around this almost standardization of what a modding project, what you should expect from a modding project.
Yeah, I think it tends, like the line we tend to draw is it needs to be if somebody were, the way we always look at it when we're deciding what way to go with things is, if somebody had never played Fallout 4 before, they should not be able to tell which stuff is from our mod. That's kind of how we look at it.
Oh, sure.
And
easy. I mean, that should be a big focus for just about any project, because the second you strip away that immersion, you know, it kind of loses the whole oomph of releasing a badass trailer and, you know, showcasing all these really nice updates and things like that. And then when you kind of serve something half baked, it kind of lets people down a little bit, you know. And it's interesting to see where everyone's going to be going over the next couple of years, because we have a lot of really, really good work getting put out there. And it's interesting to see, you know, what's come, what's gone, who's left, who's showed up, and where products have really just, you know, just kind of refined themselves to be.
Yeah.
I mean, if you would have hopped in this community, you know, 2 years ago, it's an entirely different approach to things. You had newer modding projects. I mean, I want to say about a year and a half ago to a year ago, there was the whole 76 craze, and this is when a whole bunch of newer projects started popping up. And I don't know if there was if this has always been a thing, but it seemed like a lot of newer products were starting to pop up, and a lot of people started thinking about Fallout again, because, you know, Todd hopped up on the stage and was like, 76 is on its way. So
yeah, like that was at so it was at the E3 before this last one. There was definitely a resurgence in excitement about Fallout.
Oh yeah, it was heavy, and I mean, motivation just shot through the roof, and I think it was the release of the Miami trailer, and the people over at Cascadia they were streamlining stuff. I mean, I'll give props to Flenarm. I don't know if his current development process is over there or anything like that right now, but I mean, he had a tight grip on that project, and they were doing really, really good. They must have set a precedent or something, but I mean, it's just all these dynamic projects, and all these people were coming in from all these different backgrounds, and everyone was really motivated. You were seeing updates out the wazoo. Developers, you know, there was a lot of developer gossip here and there, and, you know, people were causing issues. But it just seemed like there was a heavy resurgence with 76. And, you know, I'm not saying 76 was a letdown, but, you know, there's a lot of hiccups at launch there. It kind of motivated people to be like, okay, now we really have to depend upon these modding projects to sate our Bethesda hunger for the next couple of years.
Yeah, right, because it's going to be probably another 6-7 years before we see a Fallout 5. Which is a little disappointing, but yeah, it gives me hope that we've got a good modding community going around right now. It'll be really interesting to see how that changes when 76 opens up private servers in modding, Because I know a lot of people, like I'm torn if I'm even going to try touching it, just because I was so turned off by the game initially, and I think it was a combination of just how bad of a buggy experience it was, but more importantly because the lack of NPCs really did the game in for me. But I'm so far out of the loop now. One of the things with those online service games, I have always felt that's a problem, and it's the same thing with MMOs, is like if you fall out of the launch cycle and you let go, or if you quit for a while, it feels impossible to come back because you're never going to be as caught. Like, you're never going to have as a character with the power level or the knowledge that goes behind it that all these other people who have stuck it out for the long term. You almost have to like invest early and play the long game, and if you don't, it's really hard to get fully invested in later. That's how I've always felt about them.
It was the same thing. I don't know if you ever heard the game of RuneScape before.
Oh, yeah.
But I used to be a really big RuneScape player, and for the longest time, getting a 99 skill in that game was the thing. If you had a skill cave, it was like, oh yeah, you could do the emotes, and it was the most fascinating thing. And then they started coming out with more skills, and it was like, okay, this is whatever. And then the game started expanding more and more and more. And people started falling off because people got older and newer games came out. That was back when people were still using dial-up internet, for Pete's sake. I mean, everyone was playing that game online. You could probably count the pixels on the screen of what you were seeing, but I mean, the game itself was just simplistic, and there wasn't as, I don't know, there wasn't as big of a focus on all these updates and people. If I went back to play that game now, it is strayed so far from what I used to. I would not be able to catch up with anything.
Right.
They've added all these new skills and all these new things, and it's just it's crazy to see how games have really just changed from that dynamic. Because we'd stated before, you used to be able to be sated with, you used to be able to play every video game that was coming out. And nowadays you have, oh my God.
Yeah.
Like a whole bunch of, like, it seems like a new Assassin's Creed game pops out every 3 months. Like, I can't keep up with it.
Yeah, I've felt like I can't get back into that franchise because I skipped too many. So I'm like, they had a running story. I don't want to catch up. Well, I'm done with it. And I think that, and then that's what, like, the fact that Bethesda released 76 so buggy like that, or with so many core features people expected stripped out, like to where it was a turnoff. Yeah, you hear Todd Howard say it in interviews that he's like, yeah, well, we see every game that goes through that. It's like, I think you're like, that may have been the case in the past, but those games have all done irreparable damage to themselves, and that you'll never ever, you can't get over that bad first impression.
No, I agree. And, you have flashbacks to where, New Vegas on release had a lot of bugs. I mean, Fallout 3 had bugs in the beginning and things like that, but I felt like with the 76 thing, they had the expectation. It's like, our community's loyal. Regardless of what happens, they'll stick loyal to us.
I would also say there's a difference between single-player games and the multiplayer, because the goal with the multiplayer is long tail. You're trying to keep people engaged, and because of that thing you're talking about, like, you try and go back and play, RuneScape now after taking a break from it, it feels like too much work, and it's like I'd rather get involved with a game while it's fresh. Like, people are so hyped right now about Warcraft Classic, and it's because it's a chance for them to start over on a fresh playing field, and it feels there's a certain power to that, of feeling like you get to be a pioneer. That you just don't get when you come back to a game. So even if a game gets fixed or gets a lot of new content, you're not a pioneer. The people who stuck it out are. You're just coming back to see what's cool, but there's still a ton of people who have already been along the ride the whole time. Those people are always going to be the best, and you never will be able to.
You're like an outsider too. That's the other thing is, I remember it was recently RuneScape came out with a mobile variant. And it was this whole new system of, all the people that left playing online because they didn't have time, to sit on the computers anymore. They could now play it, anywhere in the world. And a lot of people showed up and they realized that people were still playing this game, and they were, the noobs. They were the people that didn't really know what they were doing.
Right.
And it was, again, it was cool in the moment, and, it's increased the player base a significant amount. But what the big thing that motivated that game for a while was, they re-released an older variant of the game because they had updated it so damn much. The player base was down to, I think it was like 14,000 people. And then they re-released an old variant from 2007 with, years and years of development undone. The graphics weren't as good, whatever. The player base shot up to 100,000 people overnight.
Holy crap.
Which is absolutely nuts. Now, if you look at the player base between the two games, the actual legitimate RuneScape, not the old school variant, has probably about 20,000 people online on average. The old school variant has about 98,000.
That's pretty funny.
Bear in mind, the old school version was just a petition, be like, hey, maybe we should bring this back, and now it's become bigger than the actual thing.
Yeah,
it's because it's
this weird thing of game companies keep trying to streamline, which I think is good. You do have to keep streamlining your things so that new people can onboard easily. But I think people are taking it too far. In every game, in like every genre and all over the places, and like with these games that run for a long time, they end up doing it. But I think it's like they keep rolling back to a point where they had the balance right. Like it's like, all right, we had an appropriate amount of depth in here, and it was just complicated enough that people had stuff to learn. So like that they weren't just rolling in and button mashing to get through.
Yeah. No, I was talking with Metamont, the product lead over at New Vegas. We were trying to figure out. He was like, "What the hell changed in video games, man?" I used to be able to, invite my buddies over the weekend and play Star Wars Battlefront, the original, and play that for the whole damn weekend and get satisfaction out of it. Now you can get a game that has 1,000 times better graphics, 1,000 more world space playability, and only play it for a week and be dissatisfied with it. It's like, it's really weird how people's approach to things have just adapted so readily. I don't know. I mean, the industry's changed, but geez, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to say on there because like you're young, so like I have always attributed that to most people who say that are people like me who lived through games to a point, and I'm like, it's just because we're getting older, our priorities have changed. But you're young, your priorities haven't changed yet, so you're throwing my theory out the window. Maybe it is a lot of the games themselves are just not as fun anymore. I don't know. I've been so out of it in gaming anymore, because I've been obsessed with Fallout 4 for the last 2 years that I feel like my fingers off the pulse.
Welcome to the club. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably started the club, but you know how it is.
Yeah, I don't know enough. I haven't played enough games recently to like even comment on the quality of them. Like they look amazing. Like modern games look amazing, and then
they do, but I don't. Something changed along the line. I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
I guess everyone just went and grew up at one point.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it is. Maybe the dumbing down did get too far because there is always. I mean, it's kind of like how we were talking about with the design work. Is that sometimes having those less than stellar assets in there are what make other things shine. And with companies putting so much effort into polishing every little corner and detail and removing all of this excess, is that maybe the excess is what made everything else shine. And so you would like part of the learning process of a game is like, oh, that ability is useless. I don't need that. And that was actually a good thing. Whereas, now games just cut those things out. They're just like, well, we don't want players to even think that that's useless. But maybe having that stuff in there is important.
Yeah, having the ups and downs of a game helps identify with that's probably what made a lot of the older games really unique is people kind of set aside graphics and things like that and focused more on story, and they focused more on what made the games a game and kind of overlooked those hiccups along the way. But nowadays everything is just so polished and clean, and the second you have something that remotely just throws a stone in the water, everyone starts freaking out about it.
Right.
And when you had a diverse palette and limitations of engine restraints with the same restrictions you've had with writing for the past 100 years of people writing stuff, the focus just shifted. I don't know.
Yeah. A buddy of mine is a professional designer. He designs like interiors for hotels and stuff. And he said video games have finally reached the point that all like other design in real life has reached, which is that you have the capability to do anything. So the real skill now is focusing your efforts onto a certain into a certain space. So it's basically like instead of trying to do everything, which you can now, you have to find the right elements and bring them together and limit yourself. Like it's a matter of like putting in the right number of things and the right things and right combination of things as opposed to just like jamming everything into the game. Occasionally
throwing stuff up on a wall and hoping it sticks.
Or like, I mean, obviously there are exceptions like Red Dead Redemption 2, which just threw everything into that game. Like you can do everything. Same with like GTA 5. You can
non-negotiable.
You can do almost too much in those games, and it came out to be, they end up playing very, very well. But often it's like the number of features these games throw in there is just it's to excess. It's like, we don't need that. In the game, you're muddling the experience, and so like that ends up becoming the thing. I think movies are in the same space as like now, thanks to the how good the CGI is. It's like, all right, well, if you just start you can't just throw everything together. Like if somebody did, tried to combine like all of the different universes into one, it probably would fall really flat. In fact, I think it did with what was that? Ready Player One, where he basically had all these pop culture references and everything.
Yeah.
It just was like, meh. Or
I thought it was an all right movie, but at the same time, it felt a little busy. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you're muddling the water. You're giving unfocused experiences.
You're taking away from what fundamentally made something good, and I think that's another thing that I've seen with my design field. I don't know if your buddy Designs Hotels has seen this as well, but I mean, you kind of touched on it with this whole standardization of things. Is the unique aspects that used to identify with a lot of these video games and design things have really just become standardized. How do you identify very unique niches and bring forth those things to be able to reach out to a crowd that already has its hunger sated by so many different things?
Yeah.
And it's with these bigger modding projects, what identity makes it unique other than everything else that people are playing nowadays? The examples is, bringing back nostalgia, or introducing a whole new area, or introducing a whole new dynamic, or developing something more than people ever imagined it could be developed. And those are the types of things that we'll start to see, I would think, more and more of as the industry starts adapting, as it is. And we've seen that with a few of the bigger games that people are really, really excited for. Is you can't just get away with just upgrading the engine anymore. It has to be a new experience.
Yeah.
I think it genuinely has to be a new experience, because it's not cutting the line the way that it was anymore. Because back in the day, it was like, oh, now you can't actually count the polygons on that person's face. It actually looks like a face for once. But nowadays, everything looks gorgeous.
Right.
I mean, I feel like it does.
I think one of the things I hear Todd Howard say a lot that I think he's really nailed is that when they start a new game, they focus on tone. And that's the idea of bringing all these different elements together and trying to make the player feel a certain way. And I think that's smart. And I think that's a great way to approach game development. And I think that's why you see a lot of success in the indie market right now, is that they are doing that. Because they're smaller teams, they're focusing on a very, very tiny experience. And they're pulling out like works of art out of it, and so like
they're identifying niches that haven't necessarily been sated yet, and although it's good to identify with bigger markets just to kind of check mark boxes with the battle royales, but the big thing is I just feel a lot of establishing a solid tone is really what's making these games for people. I mean, it's again telling that story and telling that movie and making things memorable. And identifying those very specific aspects of it, introducing XYZ gameplay mechanics that really just help people better identify with things. And of course, identifying nostalgia where need be. And I think that's another big thing that a lot of these bigger projects are starting to tackle, is introducing, those little nostalgic moments you saw. I mean, we see it, of course, with Fallout 4 New Vegas and the Capital Wasteland project. But, I mean, Seattle is introducing, the new California Republic. That's identifying with those niches that people once found fun that haven't seen in a while, and it's plugging it into a new aspect and putting it under a new light, and people are getting interested. It's the same thing with putting the Enclave inside of Miami.
Right.
It's just identifying those things and putting it under a warm sun, a nice sunset, rather than just having it be the same dynamic. And I think that's an issue with trying to start modding projects or bigger modding projects in dynamics that we've already kind of seen.
Yeah.
With very few exceptions.
Yeah, well, and it's going to be interesting to see how they all come out, because a lot of this stuff, we can plan on it, we can work toward it and have that as a goal, but at the end when you bring it all together, because it's you don't have the finances behind it, I think there's an expectation thing that you're going to have to be battling too, of
sure.
Especially you guys have it the worst in that regard, of the like your trailer went super viral. And so like there's a lot of, even if like just based on the quality of that trailer and then just that premise, I think people have really high expectations of and they're gonna
we're aware.
People basically want like to hit New Vegas quality as far as
sure.
Not in a sense of like New Vegas as being a game that was released in like 2009 or 2010 or whatever, but in the sense of like how New Vegas was to Fallout 3 in that upgrade from the experience from the original game that it came from.
It registered on all fronts of people that needed a Fallout game that touched base with the former aspects of those old school games we once saw. I mean, you could be a cowboy in a Fallout game. That's all you needed, you know. And the Fallout 4 New Vegas team, I mean, is going to massive strides to not only sate that hunger again, but in addition to that, introduce so many new aspects that limitations back then restricted them on.
Right.
I mean, it's crazy touching base with those guys. If you ever want a fun podcast, you need to bring Metamoth on here. I mean, he'll talk your ear off for hours, but he is the guy to talk to about that type of stuff.
The Fallout 4 New Vegas looks very, very promising, and I think it would actually probably be really beneficial for them to make sure to tell as many people as possible that that their ambitions are more than just a remake, because I think there are a bunch of people who expect games like that or projects like that to just be a straight remake, but not recognizing the fact that the technology jump from the Fallout 3 engine to the Fallout 4 engine is monstrous. There's so much more possible.
No, it is, and it is crazy. I mean, procedural generation of things is so much easier. It looks so much cleaner. You can get a lot more work done with. I mean, it's the limitations, and I mean, it's not remastering a game or recreating a game. It doesn't have necessarily so many open-ended questions of what would they have done here. It's how can we make this better than what it was.
Right. Well, and it's probably a tough line to walk too, because you also don't. There's going to be a lot of people who just want the upgraded graphics and like gunplay, and there's like don't touch anything else, and so like then you gotta find the spots where you can get away with tweaking things.
And that was a big thing I was talking with Grant about, was identifying, what draws the line between going too far and doing just the right amount of adaptation. And the nice thing about, those two projects, the Capital Wasteland and the Fallout 4 New Vegas, is they have the opportunities, to not only be able to upgrade the game, but be able to explore their own design aspects while at the same time preserving what people want to see in it. And I think people are going to be in for some really nice treats with both of those projects upon their release, because you have different designers and mindsets. You have people coming from older sides of the community that have seen those projects adapt and change, and you have all these different identities that, although aren't the exact same as what they were before. But if I built the same exact building 100 times over, it's going to get, boring over time. But if you do small adaptations here and there, it's going to create a new interesting dynamic, and it's going to get people talking about it. And I think that's what's really important about adapting things. And that was the whole debate with the Notre Dame Cathedral, was should it be rebuilt exactly as it was? Mm-hmm. Is it going to create an interesting conversation, or is it just going to fall back into, it burnt down back in this year and that's that?
Yeah. Yeah, that one, the Notre Dame one, it was very fascinating to see how they're approaching that with rebuilding it, because it's also a matter of, you do preserve the history of the fact that this happened, but that building in particular is an interesting one because it took like 500 years to build in the first place. So it's.
I mean, those old cathedrals, it is. That's another thing I talked with my professor about, is if you gave the computer technology to the architects of that time, imagine what type of badass shit they would make. I mean, think about it. I mean, the ornateness of you get with Gothic cathedrals and all these super intricate designs and engineering feats that were done with people that didn't even have, the Industrial Revolution, is just
right. Well, they were hardcore committed, because, like I said, that wasn't an exaggeration when I say that church took that long to build. They would literally, people would be working on it, knowing it would not be completed in their lifetimes. Like, they would work on it for that long. And I know a lot of it was probably financial restraints and political climate at the time and stuff that probably caused delays. But it wasn't finished for hundreds of years. That's who could invest. We're talking about investing a couple of years in a mod project. Can you imagine committing? I'm gonna commit to helping this project. It's gonna take centuries. That would be a tough one to wrap your head around.
Way over my head.
Yeah, I'm not.
And then the question is, is it going to have the same effect that Notre Dame has had over time? Is it a preservation of history, or is it a new dialogue for people to have? And I feel like the fire kind of awakened the discussion of people talking about it again. I think the opportunity to do something new with it would have been an avenue that should have been pursued, because of how much not only controversy it would have spurred up, but the opportunities it arises from. Because here's the thing, is if if a church burnt down in the Gothic times, do you think they'd rebuild it the exact same way that it was?
No, definitely not. But I think that rebuilding it the same way was the safe play. It was like nobody's going to get angry at you rebuilding it. But you would get a lot of people pissed off about, like you'd get people angry in the sense of like, that's a missed opportunity. But I don't think you'd get people that are just outright hostile about it. Whereas if you decide to change it, you're going to have a lot of people who
I don't think
are against that idea pretty heavily.
I just think the opportunity was there. I mean,
Yeah.
I'd be interested to see where more historical things come from now. I know there was a big mosque that got finished recently that had been under construction for like 1,000 years or something. But there's those opportunities that keep arising from historical precedents and whether or not we should preserve history.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes to dialogue, if you don't preserve history, are you doomed to repeat it? But I mean, I don't know. It's such an interesting dialogue to discuss this whole architectural perspective because there's always the question of, if it burnt down, back when it was built, would they rebuild it the exact same way that it was? And the answer is probably no.
Yeah.
They'd tear it down, start fresh, and do something new and try, we learned these 3 things on this project that we're going to try and do different this time around.
Right.
And it's the same thing with these modding projects. And a part of that learning experience as you travel along this journey is we really fucked up on this part, but hey, we learned these
Let's
things.
not do it exactly the same way. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and I think it's like you see with each iteration of a game, they try and improve upon it, and they don't always succeed. But I think that like with Bethesda, you see that their game engine improves dramatically generally with each attempt, that they add a lot more technology and a lot more modularization so that you can do more things.
And I think what Bethesda also realized, and I think 76 is another interesting learning lesson for that, aside from, a last little attempt to get something out of the old engine it was the final realization that, regardless of bugs and everything, this isn't going to save the community.
Mm-hmm.
It was a new idea and a new approach to, we're going to try something new. We expect our community to back us as they always have because, you can't deny a lot of their games have had bugs in the past, but people have kind of overlooked those because their games are freaking awesome. But this was like the first one where it was a jump scare of, all these things that amounted, there was a lot of bad PR that came with it, with the whole canvas bag debate, people paying too much for this, not getting refunds here. And then, and then there was the issue with, people not even launched the game. But I think it was a wake-up call for them to be like, you in this day and age, people expect a lot from you as a company. And I think Rockstar really nailed this perspective. If something's not ready, don't release it.
Yeah.
Red Dead Redemption had bugs, but it didn't have so many bugs to where people are going to go online and rant about it.
Right. Well, the game was also, it did things like so many things that no other game had ever done before that it was like you just got obsessed with that. Where it was like, oh my God, like, did you see the graphics on that? Did you see the way that they do snow and mud? It's crazy. So I think that
it is absolutely nuts.
There was enough in that game to blow your socks off. That because I did see plenty of compilation videos of like falling through the world and stuff from that. So it definitely had those. And I don't think you can ever avoid those in software. I think there's always going to be, especially when you're
there's always hiccups. There's always
like
hiccups.
That. People are always going to find ways to break them. But
sure.
yeah, no. The thing is that I think a lot of people are concerned with 76 because there's a lot of people who love 76. Like I try not to harp on it too much because there is a community and the what I've seen from the people who are active 76 players is they're almost closeted about it. Like they don't want to talk about it. Like actually, I kind of like 76.
Oh yeah,
Like it was such a public backlash against it that I feel like a lot of those players who are really pro it aren't really out about it. Like they kind of talk about it in their own little private circles, which is not a great thing. They should be, if they love the game, they should be able to talk about it openly and be proud of it. And I think that Bethesda has said that they have a lot of players. They have a very big, passionate player base. So I think a lot of the concern people have with Bethesda that didn't like of the people that didn't like 76 is that because they're saying that because they're repeating, we had a great launch, or we had a rocky launch, but we've got a great big giant player base. So a lot of people see that as a warning flag of, they're just going to keep doing it again. So like. There are a lot of people who think they did the opposite. They didn't learn their lesson. But I would say from their recent updates, the fact that they've changed gears and are going to be putting NPCs in and stuff, I think that does show that they're like, okay, we got to pay attention to what the community wants. And so hopefully they're gonna remember that with their next game and develop accordingly.
No, and I have high hopes to see where they take the game. Personally, I mean, we discussed video games, earlier in the podcast discussion was, we ourselves are more focused on the development side of things, and I don't see myself readily hopping into Fallout 76 to go and role play things out. But I think it's interesting to see where that game takes some people that were like at first very retractive against it, and how they might be able to reintroduce that game to people after changes have been made to it. But I think their initial launch did lose a lot of traditional players that held very high expectations and were not served that proper platter. They weren't really served what they needed to see, and it did hurt. But at least they finally have taken the time, and I'll give props to Todd for going up on stage and saying this. Is like, we had a lot of rough stuff at the beginning. I mean, he full-heartedly admitted it.
Yeah. Although
now everyone can be like,
compare that to that South Park episode where the CEOs would just do something horrible and they would just make a commercial with like flowing meadows in the background and be like, "We're sorry, like we know we screwed up." Where it was like the
I don't know. I thought I kind of meant a lot though for him to go up there on stage and be like, "Hey, we screwed up. We're sorry."
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be. I'm actually what I'm most bummed about is that I tried the game right away. I wish now, knowing that if I could go back and knowing that they're going to add NPCs in it a year after it came out, if I could wait to try it for the first time when it had NPCs, because that was such a sore point for me of the lack of. Because to me, the beauty of a Fallout game is two things. One is yes, you're exploring the old ruins and you're seeing what happened and seeing what you can find,
Sure.
but you're also getting to live with and affect the lives of people who lived through it and are part of it and can tell you stories about how it was used, as opposed to just listening to listen to it on holotapes. Like you actually get to affect the lives of the NPCs, and I think like that is such a important part of the experience. I think like even if the main, I made the argument with a podcast with Nero about the fact that the main narrative can be bad. It doesn't matter. It just has to be there because it gives you
Sure.
it gives you a point to reference everything to. So you have characters that care about the world. You have something happening in the world that matters. Like even if you don't do it, just knowing that it's there is like this. It's a mental thing. It's almost like, all right, this world's alive and there's something happening that I'm just kind of I'm living within that reality.
No, I think a good variant, because I came from the Gary's Mod roleplay community before I kind of stepped out of the video game scene, and I think what would have possibly have helped with this, and we've seen it a lot. Have you watched the Grand Theft Auto roleplay thing? That was like a big craze for a while there.
I'm aware of it, but I never watched any of it.
Yeah, I had watched just a few, here and there, but it was the realization that it wasn't so. What I think Bethesda was trying to capture was developing NPCs basically through player interaction. And I felt like since they didn't have that controlled server basis where you could get, very loyal role players that were willing to fulfill those roles of NPCs and interact with each other, it stripped away that entire perspective they were trying to grasp right off the beginning. And we still have yet to see private servers. And I think that's still what's kind of been hurting that whole gap that hasn't been filled with NPCs.
Yeah.
And although they are adding those back in, I felt like that was something they were trying to capture, and they couldn't capture because of not only their limitations of how many was it per world space? It was like 32 people.
Right. And it was non-persistent, so it wasn't. So
non-persistent.
You couldn't even build up the world space, which is a real bummer. But
exactly.
I know that's due to technical limitations of the engine.
And that's understood. But being able to travel to a city and see a settlement that 4 people started, that's what people were hoping to see. And
oh, absolutely, that would have been huge. That would have been a big deal changer. But that's part of the problem of them building on the old engine of rather than waiting to do this on an engine that was designed for it. Because there are games that do that. There are games that perpetually allow things to be built and the server to persist. So it's definitely possible from a technical standpoint. It's just their engine wasn't ready for it.
And I think the rush out of the gate, trying to sate that hunger, we were planning on releasing on this time. It definitely hurt a lot of just perception, and it didn't really sell it for me, and that's what really hurt. I mean, the level design in that is absolutely gorgeous, minus the saturation values of lighting, but for the most part, I mean, the world space is a genuinely gorgeous world space.
Yeah.
I think there's very rare opportunities for me to sit there and nitpick away at how a building was constructed or anything like that. It filled a lot of gaps, and it created a lot of interesting opportunities, but it was empty, and it didn't have the cohesiveness you get with a Fallout game. It's one thing to have a giant, mining sector. It's another thing to have a group of mining raiders that have occupied this and are all dressed up, in mining gear. And, they're all rolling around, still harvesting resources from the earth and doing this, and that. And I mean, that's something a little bit more interesting to explore than, desolation.
Right.
But I think if that's another thing, though, is would Fallout 76 have been a much more productive game if they wouldn't have had the multiplayer aspect, but the same mechanics as it was introduced with? So let's say, there's only 30 NPCs versus, 100 that you'd get with a usual Fallout game. Do you think if you would have stripped away the multiplayer aspect, it would have been a good game still, exploring the desolation of a bigger world, but not as many, interactions?
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's up to individual perspective on that regard. There's a lot of players who say they specifically love the complete emptiness of 76. I think though that most of it depends on the audience you look at. So there are a lot of people who who just like being, going through those MMO style games where your goal is to just grind out a character and play with your friends and just have a good time just doing random events and stuff. There's like that audience, and then there's an audience who just loves the exploring the old ruins, and there are a lot of people who like that. But I think that what really made Fallout tick and what makes Elder Scrolls tick is that exploration mixed with the NPC events happening, and like actual characters who care about that world and who react to your or even having the world react. Like, you can't even have that. Like, nothing you do has any impact on the world.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I hate about MMOs and stuff, is that it doesn't matter. Like, you can tell the best story in the world. There's no way for, some of the games have started to solve this. Like, I know World of Warcraft switched over to a method like this where they have layered instances where, depending on the progress in the quest, you see a different version of the world, so they could actually have impact. But like something like 76 is nothing you do will have any impact on the world, and sometimes you don't even, like, there's generally impact in the world on a larger scale in Bethesda games. Like, you will have, you have Megaton you can blow up in Fallout 3.
Sure.
You can take out the faction of your choice in Fallout 4. Like, there's those impact, but even just the small impact of having the NPCs change their dialogue to recognize something you chose to do is really a powerful feeling.
That's definitely a really good perspective. I hadn't really thought about it that way, because
the
player actually,
I don't know that you could have I don't know if those games matter as much without that stuff, without the like, the freedom is great, but I don't think that that's what brought in the current really excited audience. I think that even if I know, like, the open world is very important, and I know that stuff is some of the best stuff, but I don't think in a vacuum it works, and that's why Fallout 76 didn't work for a lot of people out of the boxes. I think that they thought that it was just the systems, but I think it's the systems plus NPCs reacting to what you do. I think it's the combination of those things that makes it.
And the lack thereof of adaptation of the world space over time.
Exactly.
And I'm interested to see how NPCs get incorporated, because it seems like there's an attempt to make a quest, but is it just going to be, your typical MMO quest that
right, go fetch
that guy says the exact same thing to the next guy in line.
Right.
And then you all get, the most unique component in the world, but then you see 4 other people running around.
Right. Yeah, I don't know how
they'll
deal with that. But I think that's one of the reasons that a lot of us prefer the single player RPG experience, is because it does make you feel like you're the hero, as opposed to those games where it's like, oh, everybody's the hero, so then no one's the hero, where you lose that specialness feeling that you get out of the single player experiences.
Maybe, I don't know, maybe a co-op Fallout could work better.
I think I think that would be really cool. I think co-op Fallout would be
a co-op, or maybe even a quad. But I think that's the final limitation you can have, is you can go through with a team.
Right.
And there was a really cool game reveal at E3. It was, I don't remember what it was. I think it's supposed to be something similar to a battle royale, but it's like 2 people are looking through each other in a world space, and if one kills the other, they wake up in another world space versus someone else. And I don't know how they're going to do this, but I'm pretty sure it's like a massive world space where there's 2 players hunting each other. And if one of them gets killed, they just wake up in another world space with a new opponent.
Interesting. Huh. And no, I didn't.
I don't remember the name of the damn thing.
That one. I didn't. I've fallen off of watching all the E3 hype anymore. Usually, I just wait for somebody to put together a clip of, like, the top 10 things.
Sure.
Catch up on it that way. With the exception of the Bethesda presentation, I always watch that to see if they've got any goodies. But yeah.
No, and I was really, really hoping for an Elder Scrolls, reel, but
Yeah.
Guess we'll have to wait till next year for that.
If that, it sounds like that could be quite a ways off.
Yeah, they had kind of alluded to that just a little bit, but
so did you guys take to? So one of the things that I have been thinking about ever since 76 came out, I tend to be a little looser with my quality control than I should be, as far as there tends to always be, when we do a release, people inevitably find bugs, and I don't know how to avoid it in the sense that we don't have like a professional QA department. But it could be like I could give more time to the QA we do have, and to let things bake. Did you guys on Miami, or are you aware of, because I know you've only been on the team for X amount of time, but did 76's rocky launch have any impact on what you guys are thinking for your dev cycle, as far as making sure that you don't go through the same experience? Because I think one of the side effects of that is that now people are looking at Fallout experiences, and I think they would love to see a better experience. They don't want to see a Bethesda experience in that regard of like being super buggy.
Sure. I think with our current development process, we've always had the heavy consideration of QA testing, and I think our outstanding programming department has really kind of made an emphasis on making sure things work. That's kind of been our goal, I'd say, from the very beginning. I think ever since the trailer really dropped, that was our big motivation we have this presence we kind of got to uphold, and I think the rocky launch of 76 actually helped motivate the team to work harder. I wouldn't necessarily say work as diligently to prevent, errors. I think we've always kind of had some sort of filter of progress in regards to viewing how people's work is, looked at and things like that. I could definitely agree, though, that during the 76 craze, we were much more selective on who we were bringing onto the team. And I don't know if that was because of the massive influx of people we were having.
Yeah.
But it felt like the type of developers we were bringing on were very, a lot more refined.
Okay.
While at the same time, we were being extremely selective based off of people's portfolios and things like that. And I don't know if that was strictly because we had an influx or because 76 was really letting down a lot of people. And it's like, hey, they have some good work here, but they still fell flat. We need to really make sure we step up our game to kind of hold up what we are.
Yeah.
And I think there was also, a brief competition, are we just going to fall into the shadow when 76 releases? And then when 76 released and everyone realized, oh, this game actually isn't that good, there was discussion about it for a while, and a few people, went and hopped on and played 76. Everyone, surprisingly or not, just kept developing. It was actually kind of weird. I think a few people from Cascadia and a few people from Miami kind of played the game through to get some level design things, and I know Flenarm and his upper development team at the time had done a few streams, but everyone kind of kept developing. It was really weird, actually, now I think about it.
Yeah, I've definitely been thinking about it in the perspective of and not even just from a perspective of modding, but just in software development in general. I'm just like, we all need to step our game up. Like that, we're relying too much on crowdsourcing for quality control, and I don't think that that's correct.
No, I also don't think we should. I've said this probably about 18 times now. We should never take anything at face value for, just kind of being like, we need to get this done. But at the same time, I don't know. There's definitely been a little bit more of a stringent process of, going through things, making sure things work properly. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't say our dynamic drastically changed.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't say ours has either. I'm curious because it's hard to have it change because we're in this volunteer space, and often the way you do proper QA testing generally in software is you have a whole series of tests that they have to do at every stage of things, and it can take like thousands of man hours to test something, and you just don't have that available in the volunteer community. So like with all good intention, and then when you get to the scale of some of these games, like I would actually agree with Bethesda's take on that. They should have put the game out into early like that. This is why we have the early access craze is that when you have these systemic games where people are investing into kind of a virtual economy, is that the only way you're really going to find all of the exploits and stuff is if you let it out into the wild for a while.
And I think that was a big restriction they had where this really kind of pissed me off, and you probably know what I'm about to say, is they still plan on releasing the game at the same time while also doing a QA public test.
Yeah.
When they released the alpha version and said, we still plan on releasing it at this date, that's not giving their developers any time to fix anything.
Yeah, that was a very, very strange decision. And like that's one of the things Todd Howard has said he regrets. My concern with doing that with something like a mod is and just in general with games, it's become is that early access has almost become kind of the same. Like you get the hype from early access that you normally would have got for launch, and then you don't get it again for launch. So like if you launch a game in early access, or if you release a mod in early access, you're not going to be able to launch a couple years later and get that same level of hype. Like most of the people who are super excited already came on and tried it during early access. So then you basically like blew your load early with a bad build. Like, and that's kind of unfortunate.
Yeah. And that's something a lot of the other projects have been very, very restrictive of. And it kind of sucks sometimes because people are asking, when is this coming out? When is this coming out? When is this coming out? And we just kind of have to be like, it's going to come out when it's going to come out, But it's almost the kind of surprise treat that, when you release something to people, that, they have all those expectations and you release it to them and, whether or not it sates that hunger. Then there's also the worry if you don't release it early and draw that attention, are they going to be around in a couple of years to even want to play it?
Right.
Are we still going to have that loyal fan base that's going to want to play it those years down the road?
I think
it
depends on whether there's an alternative like replacement available. Like for example, one of the things that could happen is if because there are 2 games coming out in the next year that are in the similar space as far as player appeal, but neither of them have said if they're going to have modding, and that's Outer Worlds and Cyberpunk. If either of those gets a modding scene around it, it could definitely be a problem as far as keeping a large audience for the mods in the Fallout 4 scene.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think if those do kind of step up that modding game, there's also the question that derives from are people going to pick up and run with that? I mean, like those games are really, really hyped, but we also don't know. I mean, with the whole 76 craze, do we know what we can expect?
Right. Well, yeah, I wouldn't count on anything right now. Who knows if it'll be good or bad or whatnot? But
do we have a lot of glitz and not a lot of? I mean,
yeah, but I think I'm just saying. I think there's an opening here for some other game to play the mod card like Bethesda has and draw on a huge audience and steal some of their audience.
Yeah.
So that'll be interesting to see.
Because I know, that will be really interesting to see how that goes. Because I know for a while there, maybe it's because this game just kind of fell off. I mean, Minecraft used to be like a massive modding scene.
Yeah.
Absolutely massive. I mean, people were modding at the wazoo. People were playing, the plugins for it and everything. And then it slowly transitioned away. I don't know. It's because Minecraft kind of got stale or something. I'm not too sure. I think it's because they over complexified things again. But I don't know. I'd be interested to see, where that kind of takes everyone. Is it going to steer people away from this modding community, or is everyone here just going to be like, well, I guess, our seeds never really got sowed, and we kind of just got to pack up and call it quits. But I'd be interested to see if someone is going to play that card, because I mean, if that does happen, what's going to become of it? Is it going to fix the game that was released? Is it going to make the game that was released even better? Yeah. Is it going to be something that appears and doesn't sell well with anyone? Is people with our modding projects going to stay loyal to just these modding projects? There's all those questions that start popping up, and honest to God, I mean, we can't really answer that until we see something like that really start of like jump.
Yeah.
Or like release.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, we got to see if those games are good at all. I've noticed that there's a hunger for mods. I think people are really excited about them because they allow you to take a franchise you love and explore, new gameplay ideas within them.
Sure.
And it's just that to me it seems like mods are just free marketing for these companies. So I'm just wondering why I'm waiting for another game company in the open world RPG space to just see that and take advantage of it. And see what it has.
That was the whole advertising thing is actually a really interesting, tertiary subject to kind of bring up. Is remember that whole debate that sparked up with the Capital Wasteland and reusing voice lines?
Yeah,
that was like a realization where it was like, Bethesda really likes your modding, but there's certain limitations that come with something like this. Are we going to see more and more of that in the future? Do you think they've kind of stepped back with the whole 76 craze, or what do you think's kind of derived from that?
I don't know what's going on there. I know that there's a concern right now in general. So there's a thing in marketing. There are 3 different types of advertising you get. There's paid, owned, and earned media, and essentially earned is what you would call like YouTube videos and stuff made about your content. You basically just by having a good product, people are promoting it of their own volition. That used to be a great way to market games now, but that's becoming less of a thing now, thanks to, like, for example, like YouTube starting to crack down on things with violence. Like they basically don't want to advertise on those. So now, basically that makes it so instead of YouTube effectively subsidizing the marketing for their games, now they're going to have to pay for it themselves. So then it's becoming like, is it a proper value for us to allow, things like modding and influencers to be our primary source of marketing, or are we going to get killed off in that because we're marketing violent video games? And then our modders are chipping into the money we might make from our microtransaction stores. Like that is a definite. Both of those things are definitely concerns that might be creeping into Bethesda's business model, which we don't know because we don't access that information.
And they keep rather restrictive upon that. I know a good example of this was someone had asked Pete Hines, like, what do you think of Fallout Miami? He's like, it's cool.
Yeah.
Kind of left it at that. And we don't know what their actual thought process on something like that is. And then the question pops up, let's say one of these big modding projects gets released and Bethesda really rolls with it. What becomes then? Mm-hmm. Do they, hop on and be like, hey, we want to, help you guys develop this? Or, what does it become? And there's all these wishy-washy things because I think they realize as well as modding projects have, the question of whether or not they're going to release. And I'm not saying, I'm putting this on the record, I'm not saying that no one is in a iffy fashion of not releasing right now, but, are they constantly asking themselves those questions of whether or not they should not necessarily, fiscally invest, but, marketing and public relations invest in these types of projects and kind of fuel them towards release. I know a lot of the developers, well, at least I've heard a lot of the developers from the New Vegas have been touching base with Fallout 4 New Vegas because they're genuinely excited for the project, but we haven't really heard a whole lot from Bethesda on their thoughts with some of these other big projects that have kind of derived from their, their suit of Fallout 4 production and their mishaps of 76. So I'd be interested to see, what if one of these when one of these products releases, what Bethesda's take on it will be.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I have always thought that they haven't put enough effort into that. I know like they go above and beyond as far as they get people tools. They're usually pretty good about answering obscure questions, at least shortly after the creation kit comes out. But then they kind of disappear from the scene, and this has happened with most of their game releases. I think that they could benefit from having. Obviously, we're jaded on this because we're invested, but to me, it seems like with the amount of extra press that we give their games over time in the mod community, that it would be valuable for them to have like a full-time employee whose job was just to interface with modders and get them information they need or resources they need, like. Help them get past particular problems and whatnot. The issue there is always that, like, let's say they did that. Let's say they paid somebody, 60, 70 grand a year, which would be a great job for somebody to just interface with the community. Is how do they devote that person's time? You know what I mean? Like, does every random person get access to that guy's email address just because they thought of a mod idea? Do they devote, more time to a big project or to somebody who has a track record? Like, that's obviously an issue that they would have to deal with. And then there's probably a lot of legal liabilities they're considering. But yeah, I think that the amount of marketing and the shelf life that mods add to their games, I think they definitely should be investing more time and money into it. And I know they've kind of done that with the Creation Club by essentially, hiring a bunch of mod authors to develop that content is kind of how it's looking. But that helps those individuals, but it doesn't really help the scene.
Yeah. Yeah, and then, what becomes, because once those developers kind of get hired, they're kind of, full-time doing that. I mean, is that hurting our scene and our type of dynamic as a modding community?
You took away some of the most talented people. Now their free time is on your stuff instead of the free stuff for the community.
Plus, I mean, they're getting paid to do it, so of course they're going to do it, like it makes perfect sense. But I would definitely be interested to see, it's like, let's say when one of these products releases, Bethesda's like, wow, this product's really cool. We're actually going to accept this as lore. I'm not saying that'll ever happen, but what if something like that does happen?
Yeah, I think they probably would never go down that road just because it would, like, in order to do that, they would have to have people on their staff dive in so deep into this content and spend hundreds of hours picking through it to see, does it reach our standards? Like that seems like a slippery slope there, in that in particular.
Sure.
And I think the same thing with like, investing money or purchasing into it. I think more realistically, I think they're likely to use it as free R&D. Like it's like you look at the most popular mods and be like, all right, let's take those features and build them. Let's build our spin on those.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Let's say. one of these bigger projects releases, and they're like, hey, this is a really good dynamic. We actually want to, develop this idea a bit more, but in our own version of the game. And then, they release their own variant of XYZ with their own lore and their own perspective on things. It could be really, really interesting. And I don't know. I mean, does it become the dialogue of, this mod is recognized as a featured mod? Do they?
They've been accused in the past of just ripping off mods directly. So a lot of people say that the current Fallout 4 settlement system has a lot of its features were exactly in real-time settler for Fallout New Vegas. I've never played that mod, so I can't confirm or deny that. But there are a lot of people who accuse them of doing that, of just basically taking people's ideas and not giving credit. I personally don't care. Like if they, for example, if they took the concept behind some settlements and slapped it into Fallout 5, I'd be like, great. Like now I don't have to build that because that took me a lot of time.
Yeah, no, and I mean if it's applicable, and you'd be like, hey, I kind of laid the framework for this. It kind of sucks when there's no recognition,
right?
And someone's work kind of just gets pulled, and it's like, hey, we invented this ourselves. It's like, hey, this looks really familiar.
Yeah, I think it could be a really good public move to like acknowledge it, but I think it's legal problems. I think it's like as soon as you do that, it's kind of like lawyers will tell you never to admit fault in anything. Like they'll say you get in a car accident where you were completely at fault, you don't admit fault, you don't even say I'm sorry. Is what lawyers would tell you to do. And I think lawyers would tell the Bethesda people the same. Their marketing department, don't ever acknowledge that this idea came from a mod, like because you're putting yourself into shaky legal ground on your ownership. So
then that goes back to the subject of, if one of these projects releases and it gets a lot of good feedback,
right.
Is Bethesda just going to be like, good job?
No, I don't. I think they stay silent on it. I think they're like, yeah, that's a cool mod.
Yeah,
and that's it. That's as far as it goes.
Damn.
It's a funny, but it would be fun. It would be interesting to see if somebody took the opposite approach. And I think that's the thing is like companies like Obsidian, much smaller, could do that. Like they could like take the risk because they have less to lose. You know what I mean? Like
sure. And I mean,
it's not a hundreds of millions of dollar franchise. Like I mean, realistically, like Fallout's worth billions of dollars over. You look at the life of this game.
Easy.
So like that's a lot to risk on their property. Whereas like something, a company like Obsidian, who was doing so poorly financially, they had to get bought out by Microsoft to take over publishing from them. If they put up a modding scene, they could build a lot of good community will and probably increase the modding scene if like they saw a really awesome mod. They're like, this thing's so amazing. We're giving props to the modders. We're going to give them a check and we're going to roll it out as an official release or something. Like that could be huge for the community.
Yeah, that would be freaking awesome. That was the big hope. I remember everyone was expecting Obsidian to do another Fallout game.
Right.
Like if they that's another interesting tangent to go down. What if Obsidian was ever given the reins again to do something like that? I mean, I don't think we'll ever see anything like that in our lifetime, let alone ever. But like it was interesting to see what happened with New Vegas and how much of a different dynamic it was from the Capital Wasteland.
Yeah,
and I'd love to see something like that again, but I doubt we'll ever see anything like
that's
it.
Actually, when I first saw Creation Club announced, that's what I was hoping. I was like, oh, are they going to set it up so that game companies can because can you imagine that? I would imagine that franchises like that are so beloved in the community at large, like not just in the gaming community, but if you will listen to interviews with some of the Bethesda staff before they had the Fallout license, they were huge Fallout fans. I'm sure that's the case throughout a lot of different companies where it would be like, what would happen if you let BioWare make a Fallout mod? Like what would they create? And it would probably be completely epic and amazing. And like that's what I thought Creation Club was going to be, and it turns out not anything close to that.
Yeah.
To where like you could let all these other game companies like kind of write love letters to your franchises. Like that to me it would be a great use of resources and would probably sell a lot.
No, it would be actually really interesting. There was but then then the question derives, what's preventing? How do you filter? And I don't know. You'd get a lot of different palettes. That's another thing. Is if you start letting all these different developers develop, are they going to develop their own engines? Are they going to develop?
No, I
do
mean
you
that's
have
why I think
like
if you
precedents
do it,
they need to
like
fulfill?
the Creation Club, where it's effectively a mod. They're literally building within your game engine and they're building on your stuff. Like that's what I was kind of hoping.
So it's another New Vegas, basically.
Right, exactly. You let them do the same thing. You set up the same contractual rules and everything, and let them do stuff like that.
So then, do you fall under the category that we're getting with Assassin's Creed, which is a game popped out every 3 months? Would you lose clarity with
Right. Yeah, I
the
don't think you want to do that. You would have to control. I think I think
universe?
they would have to control it. But like, if we got a new one in the series every 2 years, I think that would be. I think people would be pretty hyped about that.
I think that could definitely be interesting, and I feel like it would give them a little bit more leeway to really focus on internal development rather than putting out fires here and there and answering questions X, Y, and Z. It'll kind of give fuel to a few other game developers. It's like, hey, we were contracted out by Bethesda to do this thing, and this is part of their universe. But then there derives the issue. Hey, we want to develop a Fallout 5. Where do we pick from? Oh, well, all these good locations have already kind of been taken. Do we rule those out as not being part of our canon? Or do we just start developing, something that wouldn't be as unique as,
Well, I think
Miami,
I think you would they would
know.
take control of it in the sense of like, you don't need to have, like, if you're talking every 2 years, and let's say say they want to do one every 10 years, they could plan the locations and just like, all right, so we're going to let 4 other companies make a release in between then. And then, like, they could just approve the locations. You know what I mean? Like, if it's that small of a scale, it's not like an open game like modding. Like, one of the things they have with modding is they can't stop us from doing whatever like they can't stop you guys from choosing Miami, even if they wanted to do Miami in the future. Whereas if it was some sort of contracted thing, they could be like, you can use one of these 3 regions. Like, pick one that you like.
That could actually be really nice, really, really nice, and it would be another fascinating outlet for people that are like more like involved with the modding community. I mean, that would be an interesting opportunity for them to step into more professional spotlights, to be able to work with these game devs and work with these companies to help developing these games.
Right. If I was company X who got hired on by Bethesda to do that, I would definitely be like, all right, we either need to hire somebody from within Bethesda, or we need to go out to we need to find somebody who knows their engine who can get our people up to speed. I'm like, yeah, they could be like, all right, well, let's go grab the lead from Beyond Skyrim. That person knows their engine well. Let's work with them, or something like that. Where could be definitely like hiring opportunities too for people. Although I've tended to stop looking at that as like an exciting side of things, because it seems to me like working in the games industry is not all glamour anymore. It's not. It seems like you hear stories from like the working conditions at places like what's the Rockstar and stuff, and it sounds like it's pretty grueling.
Oh, where there was the what was it, like 60-hour weeks or something crazy?
I mean, I personally,
like towards the end of
work
development,
80 to 100-hour weeks between my real job and modding, so I don't care about those hours. But
yeah.
But like the being forced into perpetual crunch, that sounds pretty not cool.
It's heavy.
Yeah, and
no, it's super heavy.
Yeah, well, and when you get into that depth of detail in games like that, it's probably a lot more of the boring work than you'd expect in other projects.
Well, there was a big debate about it. There was the fascination with the horse animation. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, but I don't really need to specifically allude to it. There was a person that had to not only model that, a person that had to QA test that, and a person that had to animate that. People were paid to do that, and that's what me and my buddies, we were like, the amount of work and effort put into this must have been crazy. I mean, there were at least have been 20 hours put into just that thing. Which is, I mean, if you think about it, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It's nuts, no pun intended, but I mean, it's absolutely crazy.
There's a great talk somebody did at a Blender conference. I can't remember the name of the guy who did it, but you could find it pretty easily if you search for Blender talk. It'll be the one with the most views. But a guy basically like analyzed a scene in the game The Division to figure out what it would cost, and it was outrageous. Like one little section of New York, like he worked out to cost like $400,000 or something, based on the cost of an average asset and the amount of time. And it's like, this is like the development costs for these games is outrageous, like unbelievable.
And then the question derives, are you getting the payout? And that's the issue you get with, whether or not a game flops. And we've actually had some of the great, some of the greatest video games flop on release, but turn out to be really genuinely nice things. It's same thing in cinematography, and some of the most well recognized movies. I know, have you ever seen Shawshank Redemption?
Oh, yeah.
Had one of the biggest cinema flops in the world on box office release, but it's one of the most recognizable movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, the movie's incredible.
And it's
I used to be a DVD collector, and I did a great purge at one time, and I was like, I'm gonna go down to my favorite 25, and that was one of the ones that made it in.
Oh, easy.
Because it's so much.
Shawshank Redemption is an instant classic.
Yeah, good. Such a great movie. Oh man.
That's
But yeah,
that's another thing. I need to pick up Shawshank Redemption again. I need to go through my cruise through my old collection of DVDs, because I mean, that's another thing. I mean, back to the little video games subject of video games, not sitting the hunger anymore. I feel like a lot of those older movies have really christened themselves as being, instant classics for the collection, but we aren't really getting a whole lot of those anymore.
Yeah, that's a debate I'm not familiar enough with. I've fallen out of the film. Like I used to go to the movies all the time. I feel like I come out for like the big Marvel releases anymore. That's about it. Like the
yeah, I'm the same way.
All I find myself at the theater for anymore. So like and I think part of that is just just life ran away, and I just ran out of time. I had to pick some things to sacrifice, and so like film became one of those. Same with TV. I'm finding I watch less and less of that. Like watched Game of Thrones, and before that I can't remember the last show I actually watched all the way through anymore.
But yeah, I mean that's typical. I mean, the same way with TV and all that. With a 40-hour work week, and then on top of that, 40 hours of modding and things like that, it tends to constrain people's time just a little bit.
Well, I think there's all this is a whole other can of worms. I'm only going to briefly open, and then I'll let you go, because we both got stuff to do talking about all these modding hours we got to do. But of the fact that there's like an oversaturation of entertainment available, to where not in just games you can't digest them all, but it's also the problem with television and movies too, thanks to like Netflix and all these streaming services. That there's this weird. My wife and I were talking about this, that there's this weird cultural divide forming of that we can't relate to each other anymore about pop culture. Like it used to be way back in the day, you'd have like the water cooler conversations because there were 3 television stations. And it's now every time like we're at work and we try and bring up a show, nobody has seen the same shows because there's such niche entertainment available for everybody now. And like this just weird little cultural thing. We're wondering what the implications will be. That like it seems small and stupid, but like those little bonding moments are actually important. And like those are all gone now, or they're being diminished greatly.
It's back to the whole idea of being able to play every video game that came out.
Right.
It's not doable anymore.
Yeah. Well, that also explains why something like 76, like Bethesda would have the take it does. It's like we've got a great big community. You recognize like it's not possible to make a game that satisfies everybody. So if you can make a game that satisfies a few million people, that's pretty damn good. That's success.
Yeah. Nowadays it's a matter of just meeting that quota. It's not so much of winning game of the year, which I mean is still a big deal, but at the same time, it's a matter of just getting those numbers nowadays. Yeah. I'm not saying people are ceasing good development on games, but it's definitely become a bigger focus.
Right. All right, man. Well, it's been phenomenal talking with you.
No, it's been phenomenal talking to you too.
I'm very, very excited to see Miami make the finish line. I hope you guys are one of the ones that pulls it off. I am very confident that you will, based on our conversations I've had with you. Are now the 3rd lead. I think you'll be the second one that people hear on my podcast. But it's a month of.
Simon's gonna wait a little bit longer,
right, until you guys reveal the information that he revealed to me too early.
Sure.
It's awesome to hear. It's kind of we're having like the month of Miami, I guess. Especially thanks to Mika's shocking release.
Yeah.
So it's pretty awesome.
Something a little bit more tropical for people's taste. But it was my pleasure. It was a real fun time talking with you and chit-chatting. It seems like we made it up to 3 hours and 20 minutes for Pete's sake, a little bit more than 2. But hey, it was a real hoot of a time talking with you and shooting the shit back and forth. And I really enjoyed the opportunity. And I just want to give a shout out to not only your team, but a lot of the modding projects out there. Keep up the good work, everyone. And shout out to anyone watching that wants to get into modding. Only you can start that adventure, and the resources are out there. Check out kinggath. I probably botched your name there, but check out his modding school. He's got a lot of outstanding resources out there. He's doing a lot of outstanding development things, and feel free to stop by any of the community discords and some of these bigger projects, because we got a lot of fun stuff coming on the horizon, and I'm sure you guys will be in for a real treat over the next couple of months.
Absolutely, great talking with you, man.